Jimmy pulled his pants up. Oh, hi. My name is Jimmy Calloway. Thank you for joining me here on An Old Man Reads His Novel. We're trying to reconnect. Oh, boy. I mean, the feed seems like I'm still going out, but I'm getting a message that says my connection is unstable. Just waiting on my son, whom I'm most concerned with reading to, even though there's a lot of boning in this book. There's more sex in this book than I remember writing. I don't usually write that many sex scenes into things. So I will bullshit a little bit before I begin. Part 3, the thrilling conclusion of Lupo Danish Never Has Nightmares, available nowhere right now. I do have the Mobi file for this book. If you have a Kindle or some sort of other e-reader and you would like to have a copy, that I can send you. I only have a very, very few copies of this, like hard copies of this left right now. I do hope to put this thing back into print. When Crime Factory closed down a couple of years ago, the rights reverted back to me. And so, yeah, I want to do something with it, but I just haven't yet. How's my hair? So in last night, we did part 2, which was Lupo Danish versus Gail Monroe in Beowulf, which was written by Jack Beowulf in the year 900. In the first part, Beowulf fights Grendel, who in this book is represented by Grendel or by Delbert Greenwich. And then in the second part of Beowulf, he battles with Grendel's mother, who I don't think ever gets like a name. She's just Grendel's mother. And so Gail Monroe was played that role in this book. And then the final act of Beowulf battles a dragon, and he doesn't do too good, if I remember correctly. I don't know if I do. And so we will see that in part 3. I feel like there was something else I wanted to talk about, but now I can't remember what it is. I mean, there's a lot like, I don't know if other writers feel this way, but I genuinely kind of want to discuss like the book club aspects of my own novel. Like I want to be like, oh, what does this represent? What do you guys think this represents? Because I put a lot of work into this motherfucker. So any author who's not world famous, or at least a working author, probably thinks they should be more well-known and their work more discussed than it is. Discussed as in talking about, not as in disgusting. But I guess there's no but. I mean, that's how I feel. But I get it. I'm not like railing against my plight, and I'm hoping that once my stand-up career really starts to take off, then everything will be fine. I don't know. All right. I'd also like to point out my beloved Mike S. Miller prints. You can't really tell. This is why I got fired from The Price is Right. These are matching prints by Mike S. Miller. He's a very talented comic book artist in the same position, but in this one, she's like kind of sad, like, oh no, worried about what's happening. And in this one, she's like, yeah, I'm the Dark Phoenix, and that's my blah, blah, blah. So I've always really liked that. I did a Skype thing with my friend Robert Schneider yesterday, like a podcast, and he admired it, and so I thought I'd point. He also admired my Wolverine mask, which is right up here. I also have the claws up there as well. I'm not farting around out here. Let's see. So I talked to the boy, and we're going to do. This is going to be called Big Boys Like Story Time with Grey Dog and J Dog. I'm J Dog. And next Wednesday, The Shadow over Innsmouth. And that is a novella, very long short story. We'll do it at 6 p.m. We might not get all the way through it because I have another video conference at 8:30 my time, but we'll do our best. This is the boy recently kind of because it was free or maybe 99 cents. And I had just seen The Color Out of Space, the most recent film version of that, starring Nicolas Cage, the Alamo Draft House in downtown Los Angeles. And so I went back and read that short story because I hadn't read it since I was a kid. And man, it was pretty good. I don't, Lovecraft I know is kind of problematic these days, but man, he's all right. He's better than Mickey Spillane, which I had to explain to the boy with that. So that's what we're going to do next week. I would like to, if for no other reason than my own ego gratification, read some more of my own fiction. There's the ego part, but then there's also I feel like if I do this, I'm feeling the urge to write fiction to come back because I've only really written jokes for the last 6 years, going on 7. And not writing any jokes lately, though. I do not feel like it. This is not a jokey time. I'm sure I will regret this opportunity to get some new material, but I think I would rather write more fiction. When I started writing Lupo and around that time when I was working on it, I wanted it to stand on its own. I didn't want to do any more stuff with these characters, but I am starting to rethink that a little bit. But I also have a ton of other fiction that, I'd like to get out there if I could. So, in fact, I think maybe we'll do this after Innsmouth. Maybe me and the boy will switch off picking things, and I won't always pick my own stuff. But this here is an anthology of short fiction called Blood and Tacos: The Beginning. Blood and Tacos was an online fiction magazine begun by my friend, the very funny and very talented Johnny Shaw. The fact that he's funny is secondary because he's not a comedian. He's a very good author. And so the conceit of Blood and Tacos was it was a magazine collecting found men's adventure fiction, like in the 70s especially, but, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, the golden years or whatever. There was a market for that, men's fiction, adventure, He-Man, pulp stuff. So Johnny wanted to do something like that. And so we all the writers that contributed under, pseudonyms, and then as found by Jimmy Calloway. I don't even remember the pseudonym I made up for mine. But mine takes place in Vietnam. It's an ARVN story, the Army for the Republic of Vietnam, which is the South Vietnamese Army, who because I love Vietnam history, specifically about the war, and stories that take place therein. I watch Full Metal Jacket every couple months or so, and ARVN always gets a bad rap, so I wanted to give them something, and I do want to do more with these characters for sure. But I've always been very proud of this little short story. It is more of a novella, and even Johnny himself, and I don't like sucking my own wiener, but Johnny was like, "This actually might be too good for our magazine." I mean, I did try to make it because the magazine itself was kind of light. It was supposed to be men's adventure fiction, but it was tongue in cheek, and mine wasn't quite as tongue in cheek, which not on purpose. It just kind of came out that way. Anyway, speaking of which, all right, we are going to begin part 3 of Lupo Danish Never Has Nightmares, and hopefully this won't take. I think the middle section is the longest section for sure, but yeah, we should be all right. And what I got some. I don't have anything, but all right, part 3. 1. I wish I could tell him I'm fine. In fact, I've never been better. I wish I could tell him not to worry so much, to not feel so bad all the time. I wish he would just relax. 2. The swimming pool. A rickety space heater crackled in the far corner of the trailer, its sickly orange glow as warm as an English muffin. Lupo looked at him. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, Mr. Braddock sighed. He loved that goat. Mr. The divine light of the future shall shine upon your ears if you but open them. I'm sorry, sir. Lupo Braddock. His ice blue eyes bulged nearly out of his head. So, no on a coffee or anything then? Mere mortal worm-the-ups are no longer within your ken, my old friend. Many are the hours I have spent in meditation here in this portable job site trailer as men erect the latest bastard of our ill-fated loins just beyond these crepe paper walls. Lupo tried to focus. On the wall behind Mr. Halston, stuck to the wood paneling with Scotch tape, was a poster of a cartoon Earth, a big dopey smile on its surface, the words Happy Earth Day around it. Okay, Mr. Braddock said, why don't we just skip over the erect loins and get to the point, huh? I'm freezing my balls off in here. Lupo stared at the poster until its friendly, wide-eyed grin began eyes shut and opened them again. Happy Earth Day. Silence! Mr. Halston picked up the desk blotter and slammed it down, scattering papers to the floor. Lupo snapped to attention in his chair. How can you heed my words if you listen not? For the sake of your very life, allow me to proceed uninterrupted. Smiling, Mr. Braddock made the lock and key motion over his mouth, threw it over his shoulder. Mr. Halston looked at Lupo, sitting straight, face front. Mr. Halston nodded once and said, Oh, the sights and sounds of panic paint a portrait of a city waking to a realization that a man has died and that a monster has taken his place. Yea, as we legitimate businessmen doth go about another locale in which to meet and greet and purchase high-ticket items, as we fill our coffers with no-show paychecks and concession on the surrounding lots of parking, in our midst doth stalk walking recompense. For as surely as I stand here before ye do, my guys out in the city of Banner assure me that a man, a horrible man, a man who stomps around in the very shadow of death itself, like some kind of great shadow stomper, makes his way here as we speak to rip from our clutches our most vaunted enterprise in order to hie it back to his patrons in their spindly robes and rusted crowns. We are beset, my friends. We are besieged, dear sirs. Unless we repent now, we damn completely our very souls. And then Mr. Halston was crushed to death. The guy came through the roof like a runaway freight elevator. The ceiling burst open, flimsy plasterboard swinging wide like trapdoors, and snow slid in and splattered the carpet. Lupo saw Mr. Halston's neck snap beneath the weight, saw his eyes bug once more behind his hair as it swept into his face. The guy was big, about Lupo's size. He wore scuffed Doc Martens, ratty jeans with a hole in one knee, and a leather vest over no shirt. On his chest was a tattoo of a dinosaur skeleton, the logo from that Jurassic Park movie. He had a slight paunch over a huge belt buckle, an elaborate vista of rolling hills and trees, Wyoming emblazoned across the bottom. He had a prominent happy trail of dirty blonde hair. Braddock looked at Lupo. The hell is this now? The guy whipped one of his rifles off of his back and blew Mr. Braddock's head off. Lupo wiped a piece of Mr. Braddock's brains out of his eye, smeared blood off his face onto the shoulder of his pea coat. The guy spun the rifle around on his finger and slid it back over his shoulder into its holster. He winked at Lupo. Lupo Danish, he said. Park Harprel, Lupo said. He felt himself smiling, his upper lips over his, and just the unceremonious splat on the pavement after melting off a store overhang. A dancing Santa stood in the window of a closed gift shop, his arms frozen in an elderly guy in a ratty suit, one eye clouded like milk, smiled up at Lupo around a chewed stogie. Lupo smiled back and checked his watch. 5 after 8. Excuse me, Lupo said. Has the number 42 come by yet? The old guy jerked his thumb down the block. Come and gone, he said. Lupo leaned over the curb, could just make out the large blue and white backside of the bus a block and a half down the street. Lupo exhaled, kicked some snow into the gutter. Yes, sir, the old guy said, taking a cigar out of his mouth. Buses are like women. Lupo smiled politely. Yeah? Yeah. Don't watch out, they'll flatten your ass. A laugh jumped out of Lupo's throat. Yeah, well, he said. Nice night for a walk anyways. Yeah, the old guy said. As Lupo walked, Lupo laughed again. Whatever you say, old timer. Lupo put his hands in the pockets of his pea coat and headed south on 53rd. The sidewalks were a bit crowded, but Lupo walked quickly, sliding gracefully around old ladies with their shopping carts and young couples bundled up together. He kept as far from the street as he could, almost lurking in doorways. Wreaths and holly still hung from each lamppost, Christmas lights strung from pole to pole. The pinpoint lights cast a weird pale glow on everyone Lupo passed, some kind of post-holiday depression spray on tan. 53rd led Lupo down into Fortlow Square, and he looked at the landmark buildings of downtown. The Purvis National Building, the Kapchek Towers, the top-heavy cubist Skylark Building. Lupo had seen the Fortlow skyline hundreds of times in pictures and on postcards, and he often tried to justify that image in his head against these cold brick-and-mortar things, people in taxis skittering at their feet. He could never quite do it. Lupo cut across Fortlow Square to 51st and let his eyes drift over the statue of Seth Fortlow, city founder. Like every other Fortlow City school kid, he'd been dragged down to the Natural History Museum, catty-corner to here, and then out to the base of this statue, the springtime sun glaring off its bald head as the tour guide went blah, blah, blah. The statue stood tall over the square, even though Lupo remembered reading somewhere that the guy was only 5'3" in real life. Something snow piled up on his head, his shoulders, his raised leg. The plaque beneath him read, "From the land comes life." Lupo spat on the sidewalk as he off, on, off. He remembered, we rehearsed that motorcycle driving by right then. He remembered all those years ago sitting in the juvie holding cell on the first floor of this building, sweat pouring off of him as he sat there in his bathing suit. All the junior gangbangers and teenage hustlers herding themselves to the other side of the cell, not even a spare glance over their shoulders at him. Then, after that long night, he was stepping out through the front doors before lunchtime, a sweet summer breeze to greet him along with Mr. Braddock's limo at the curb. Lupo jammed his hands deeper into his coat pockets and shivered. Nobody's punched anyone yet. What's going on here? Oh, wait, a guy died. Never mind. 4. I can't move my fingers or my toes. My eyes will respond somewhat to my mental commands. They'll move left when I make them, but then they won't stop, rolling all the way to the left until it hurts, and then bouncing slowly back to the right and up, like a broken version of Arkanoid. When he sits next to me, I'll thrust my eyes all the way to the right as hard as I can, trying to use their paltry momentum to bounce my head in that direction. It never works. But it's not all bad, really. 5. Lupo leapt at him, tackling Park Harple around his midsection. They tore through the back wall of the trailer like it was made of balsa, Happy Earth Day smacking Lupo in the face. What was left of the trailer's ceiling groaned and snapped in on itself. They rolled through the snow, but once Park got under Lupo, he put both feet on Lupo's torso and kicked, sending Lupo up and over into a pile of rebar near the lip of the construction. "I've always wanted to do this," he said, and wrapped a long piece of rebar around Lupo's throat from behind. The metal squealed as it was bent, but before Park could tighten his grip, Lupo whipped his head back and butted Park in the teeth. Park said, "I like a filly with spirit." Lupo stood, peeling the rebar from his neck. He whipped it at Park's head like a boomerang, and when Park ducked, Lupo drop-kicked him in the face. Park fell backwards, kicking up dirty snow and landing on the back of his head against a pyramid of concrete drain pipes. Lupo ran and jumped at him, but Park rolled out of the way, so Lupo smacked into the pipes with his face. Park laughed until Lupo reached down and grabbed him by the back of the head and began whirling him around like a hammer thrower. Sweat and stars clouded Lupo's vision, and after 2 full revolutions, he hurled Park away into the massive construction pit. Park gave a goofy holler as he fell. Yahoo-hoo-hoo-wee! Lupo put his hands on his knees. Blood from his nose spotted the snow. He sighed. There's no accent so far, but if I have to do another Yahoo-hoo-hoo-wee, I'm not going to be thrilled. All right. 6. In the dream, Lupo unfold. He can feel objects around him, furniture or something, ghostly presences. He bangs his shins as he walks, stubs his toes. He holds his hands out in front of himself, trying to step lightly, but with each step, the ground crunches beneath his shoes. A pale light creeps up from behind him, a puke orange dawn. He stands still and blinks, waiting for the light to catch up to him. His hand brushes against something tall and relatively sturdy, and he leans on it until it begins to groan. With the growing light, Lupo sees he is stomping the city beneath his clumsy feet. Lupo stiffens, removes his hand from the Skylark building. He stands straight, rigid, trying to render himself invisible. He slowly turns and observes the path of destruction behind him. Flattened cars, broken trees, lampposts lying in the middle of the street like matches from a spilled box. A burst hydrant rockets water to the top of Lupo's left shoe and dampens his sock. As Rosacea fingered dawn grows brighter, Lupo watches the people begin to flood the streets like sleepy ants. He wants to say something. He wants to apologize for wrecking everything, but he worries the volume of his voice at this size would make heads explode for blocks around. So he stands there, afraid to even adjust his feet into a more comfortable stance. He cocks his head, listening for tiny sirens, miniature car horns, cute little screams of horror. But the city is quiet as the wan light floods its streets and uncomfortable peace over everything. With great care, Lupo squats down at his feet. Rather unlike ants, the people move as if in tar, each step a mighty labor. Lupo squints down at them and sees that everybody is walking hunched over, as though carrying massive invisible boulders on their backs. A lone businessman drags his suitcase behind him. A group of school children wait for a bus, their shoulders almost touching the ground. Lupo feels his chest begin to tighten. Still moving very carefully, he reaches as far up and pushes himself up. But it's no use. The gravity begins to pull him back, and soon he is falling. 7. Pause for coffee. All right. 7. Lupo felt a cold coming on. He walked down into the construction pit on shaky legs, head light. He sniffled, and then again, blood and mucus oozing down his throat. He squeezed his eyes shut once more and breathed deep. The long slope into the pit was crusty with snow, wide tire tread. The shopping mall parking garage jutted coldly up at the night, the skeleton of a massive beast. Tarps rattled in the wind. Lupo walked past front loaders with melty icicles dripping from their teeth, a crane with its shovel curled up to itself for warmth. He heard a wolf whistle from above. I definitely can't do that. He looked up just as Lupo dove and rolled out of the way. Park said, "Yee-haw!" as he rode the bushel of steel to the ground, diving off and away before they landed. The heavy steel beams crushed to the ground, the remaining cables snapping like floss as the beams rolled hither and yon. Park Harple swan dove towards Lupo, arms extended, chest thrust out, a beatific look on his face. As he neared the ground, he tucked and then rolled, springing to his feet and punching Lupo in the jaw. Lupo swung back and only clipped Park's chin, but brought his left to block Park's next punch. He brought his knee up into Park's stomach and headbutted him again. Park shook his head and said, "Man, you see that dive? I should have been a fucking Olympian, I'm telling you." Park reeled back and swung his rifle at Lupo like a bat. Lupo smacked it away with his left, jabbed Park with a right. Park's nose squirted blood and he laughed, a single ha-ha! He pulled the other rifle from his back and came at Lupo with both, making whooshing nunchuck noises with his mouth. Wah! Hey, hey, hey! Look at me, I'm fucking Bruce Lee. Come on then, Bob Wall, show me what you got. The stock of one rifle grazed Lupo's temple and he smacked it away. He moved around so the nearest halogen was behind him, and Park and his impromptu clubs cleared into focus. Lupo blocked his swings with the flats of his hand, slapping them away from him. But Park kept pushing in. "Come on, O'Hara, where are you at? Where are you at?" Lupo grabbed at the next rifle to whiz past him and ripped it from Park's hand. Park brought the other rifle up, flipped it around, and pulled the trigger. Lupo ducked as the shot rang in his ears, reached up and grabbed the still hot barrel and slammed the stock butt end into Park's chest. Park's arms went slack, and Lupo tore this gun from him too and threw it away. Park put up his dukes. "All right then, mano to mano, motherfucker." Gave Lupo a 1-2, his left blacking Lupo's eye and a right across the jaw. He giggled and went for Lupo's breadbasket. Lupo caught him by the wrist with both hands and punched Park in the face with his own fist 1, 2, 3 times. Park wriggled loose and backed away a couple yards, dancing on the balls of his feet. "Woo, come on," he said, and came forward, throwing a high kick at Lupo's chin. Lupo dodged, gave Park a rabbit punch in the thigh. Park dropped and swept a kick at Lupo's feet with his other leg, a loose I-beam. "Ah, son of a," he said. He gripped it by the end and swung it over himself as he got up. Yeah, this is a giant beam. He gripped it by the end and swung it over himself as he got up. Lupo jumped to the right, and the heavy steel beam bit into the frozen ground with a metallic clank. Park swung the beam at him backhanded. Lupo caught it with both hands. Heels digging into the snow, he pulled it away, yanking Park off the ground. Lupo hauled the beam into a vertical position like a caber toss, Park dangling from the other end. Park let out a yip and then simply let go. As he fell back to earth, he shoved back at the beam. The cold steel, already slippery in Lupo's hands, pushed back against him until Lupo had to let go and jump out of its way. Park somersaulted backwards away from him and stood there, bloody snot running over his upper lip. Lupo stood tensed, but with his fists at his sides. The breath of both men puffed out of them in long clouds. You're right, Park said. This is fucking boring. Let's go endanger some civilians. 8. Pardon me. You can't see it, but off camera I have 50 different beverages. 8. Lupo was beginning to shiver a bit when he finally arrived at the Plenty of Earth restaurant over on 47th and Aristotle. When he was a kid, this was a pie shop called the Upper Crust Diner, a neon sign of a winking pie out front, bulletin board just inside the door, over which was a banner that read, Happy Yuletide to all. The music being pumped softly over the PA had not changed, however, still a blend of 1960s pop favorites. The tiny hostess with the huge eyeglasses was mouthing the words to Help Me Rhonda when Lupo's shadow loomed over her, freezing her in mid-chorus. Hi, Lupo said. The hostess swallowed, her fingers mindlessly reaching up to paw at the ankh around her neck. One, sir? Actually, I'm supposed to meet somebody. Okay, yes, go ahead on in and we'll bring you a menu. And she trailed off and tried to look distracted. Thank you, Lupo said and pushed through the bead curtain into the main dining room. He hadn't realized it, but he'd been half expecting there to be a spotlight on her, some kind of angelic chorus ringing faintly, a hazy slow motion effect. But it was just Elaine, sitting alone, both of her hands cupped around a large steaming mug. She stared out the window, and there was something of a cinematic moment in her throat. She looked pretty much the same. She had shed the gentle teenage baby fat, the curves of her face and shoulders lined with more grace, more womanhood. If you're unclear, this is Elaine from the first part that he met at the water park that he was working at the night he killed Johnny. Her brown hair was a little longer, and she would brush one lock back over her right ear every 5 minutes or so. It seemed like she wore a little more makeup now, a darker shade of lipstick, more eyeshadow. The sleeves of her sweatshirt were pushed to her elbows. And her black t-shirt said La Tigre. She looked up at Lupo, and one corner of her mouth tried to smile. Hey, she said. How's it going? Lupo said as he sat. He kept his knees far apart, terrified he'd brush against her leg or something. She shrugged. They sat there. She pursed her lips and raised her eyebrows. Lupo did the same, nodding his head in agreement. The waitress came over, and they both wanted to hug her. Anything to drink? She said. Lupo said, tonic water? The waitress frowned a little, her eyebrow ring clinking softly against her glasses. Water? Yeah, and if you can throw some tonic in there, that would be swell. The waitress said, glancing at Elaine. Okay. She placed a thin, unlaminated menu before him and went away. When Lupo looked up, Elaine was smiling at him. Lupo, she said, almost a whisper. He swallowed again. 9. And then slowly, it began to dawn on me that none of it mattered. All that stuff I'd heard in church or on TV about how the body was merely a shell, the spirit, it's my only real regret, and likely always will be. So yeah, this coma fucking sucks in a lot of ways. He frowned at him. He frowned back. What? He said. That's all you're having? She said. He shrugged. Elaine said to the waitress, bring him the enchanted garden salad. She looked at him. It has a ton of other veggies in it. It's better for you. Sounds delightful, Lupo said, handing the waitress his menu. Easy on the enchantment, though, huh? The waitress actually laughed a little at that. Elaine said, lettuce is mostly just water. There's almost no nutritional value to it alone. They don't have croutons? Seriously, ordering a salad is like ordering a bowl of water. That's fine, water's good for you, but it won't sustain you. Okay, he said. They lapsed comfortably into uncomfortable silence. From the PA, Frankie Valli implored Dawn to go away. He's no good for her. So, she said, yeah, you look good, she said. Thanks, you too. Girl, we can't change the places where we were born. Thank you. Did you have a nice Christmas? Lupo shrugged. Yeah, I suppose. He picked up his water, but then set it back down. Actually, I didn't do anything. Just watch TV all day. Oh, well, that sounds relaxing anyway. What did you watch? She's had a rough time of it. My sister took off with some guy a few years back, and my mom had to take Roxy in. I was off at school, and my mom, she just didn't, she couldn't keep up, you know? Lupo nodded. Elaine slumped into her seat a bit, looked out the window. So Roxy, she had some problems, the usual sort of shoplifting, rehab, all that stuff. Nothing, nothing serious. And I've done my best, Lupo, to try to help, to try to talk to her. Lupo felt the heat drain out of his face. But now she's mixed up with a real serious asshole. This guy is, well, he's scary. He's very scary, and I didn't know who else to turn to. No. Oddly enough, Lupo began to feel more at ease. There was a creeping sense that he was being set up, like Mr. Braddock was going to come out with their entrees, talking shop. To Lupo's right, behind the dining counter, where there once hung a chalkboard for the daily specials, there was a painting, or a print of one anyway, shoulders up near their ears. A woman, naked to the waist, stood to their right, looking down her proud nose at them, her right arm extended as if ordering them away into the unknown. Behind her, one chimp slunk away into the darkness in the opposite direction the woman commanded. Elaine said, "Lupo?" He turned to her. She smiled nervously. He said, "What's this guy's name?" 11. That's another real painting, but again, I've forgotten who it's by or what it's called. 11. Park Harple threw Lupo Danish through the plate glass window of the Golden Dragon Chinese buffet. Yum yum dim sum. Lupo landed on his back on a table for 10 and slid all the way to the end, his pea coat smeared with beef broccoli and sat fork in midair. Lupo pushed her over backwards. She looked at him. Lupo pushed her over backwards in her chair just as Park leapt in, executing as a good one. Lupo grabbed Park by the front of his vest and hurled him into the main buffet. The sneeze guard shattered as Park flew through it and into the mirrored wall behind, his feet non-responsive. With a laugh, Park began to toss out the trays and reach into the guts of the buffet table, hurling sterno cans at Lupo. Lupo knocked them away and threw a chair at Park's face. When Park ducked, Lupo jumped over the table and landed with both feet on Park's back. Park pushed himself up and said, "I can do this all day, Sarge," and did 2 more push-ups, clapping his hands in between. Lupo raised his foot and stomped down on the back of Park's head. Before Park could pull his face out of the floor, Lupo stomped down again and again. Park finally went limp. Lupo stepped down off of him and leaned against the Park-dented wall, shattered mirror still tinkling to the ground. He closed his eyes for a moment, and Park jammed a meat fork into Lupo's foot. "Hey, you want to play rough, do you?" Park's teeth were pink with his own blood, but his smile was as brilliant as ever. He threw a punch that Lupo blocked, but Park's next left connected solidly, and the room wobbled and Lupo backwards over the buffet. Lupo wiped the blood off his chin and saw that the restaurant was now cleared. It looked like there were lights outside, but no civilians were in sight. Lupo smiled with one corner of his mouth. He leapt over the buffet table like it was a pommel horse. The Park had already grabbed a bronze dragon, one of 2, that greeted cousin Lupo full in the abdomen. The wind rushed out of him like it was being vacuumed. Park giggled and brought the thing down on Lupo's head. Lupo couldn't tell if it actually made a gong sound or if some racist part of him just expected it to. He also blacked out for a second. He came to on his feet, and Park was cartwheeling over a table to grab its cloth, the abandoned meals atop it still steaming. "I've always wanted to do this," he said, and yanked at the corners of the tablecloth. The plates and glassware smashed to the floor, a shattered symphony, and Park said, "And the flowers are still standing." Lupo shook his head, which was now throbbing like an overworked babysitter's. He grabbed the table nearest him, turned it to its side to spill its contents, then lifted it over his head like a 2x4. Park looked up in time to say, "Whoa." Lupo brought it down on top of him, but it only brought Park to his knees. Lupo reached for another table, but it was smaller, much smaller, a little too top. Lupo threw it, stand down, and it flew over Park's head to stab into the wall behind him. Park let out a whistle. "Good arm, man," he said, and grinned before a chair landed in his face. "Ow!" he said as it splintered. "Can't you take positive feedback?" Lupo rushed at him, and he danced away with a giggle over to the dessert table, the big soft bleat. Lupo smacked him away with each labored step as though walking in a stiff wind, the smashed ceramic piling at his feet like snow. Park giggled and giggled, blood running down his nose into his mouth, down his chin, onto his bare chest. When he got to his last dish, his laugh subsided. One eye on him, Lupo leaned on the back of the chair, listened to his breath wheeze through his own bloodied nose, felt the hot air on the backs of his cold teeth. Park hocked something up out of his lungs and spat. The walls, paneled with mirrors, reflected the empty restaurant back of them from every possible angle. Lupo watched as he and Park struggled to catch their breath into infinity. Park rubbed a hand over his face. Oh boy, some night, huh? Lupo nodded. Yeah, Park said. Okay, time's in. 12. It was an extremely slow-going process, but then again, time is hardly an issue anymore. Once you have all the free time imaginable, it ceases to be such a big deal. My brain would basically nap all day like a house cat, but then it began to get really, 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 really bored. Like really bored. So it began taking little walking trips. Well, that's not quite right. It's more like swimming, this pushing through some interminable stuff, this reality stuff, which flowed around it, but also, by its very presence, created this soft yet undeniable pressure. When I was a little kid, I used to have daydreams about the entire world being made of Nerf. It was kind of like that. So anyways, my brain began taking these little swimming trips. Tiny ones at first, so tiny I barely noticed, occupied as I was with impotent toe wiggling. And even then, tiny as these swims were, my brain would have to take a huge nap afterwards. If it pushed out for a minute, say 60 seconds of breaststroking through the sea of reality, it would have to go back to sleep for 16 or 17 hours. But then that became 15 hours to 3 minutes, 12 hours to 8 minutes, so on and so forth. I was getting the hang of it, catching up to my own brain, riding its back like a trainer at Marineland. My mom was first, and as something of a mama's boy, I could have been in a real disastrous zone. Fortunately, she was pretty much overwhelmed by grief, so it wasn't like she had a lot of room for gross stuff like, sex or anything weird. My mom would sit by my bed for most of the day, coming in around mid-morning, leaving usually by dusk. She'd do crossword puzzles and then watch The Twilight Zone at noon. My brain rustled out of a nap, and I could hear Shelley Berman grousing about people. When I can achieve that millennium, that absolute perfection that comes with solitude, you read. And then his boss calls him a madman, and I wasn't paying close enough attention at the time, so I don't remember what else. Anyways, my brain sort of wakes up and waits for my eyelids to roll as open as they can over the next half hour. But it's not like it's just waiting there tapping its foot. It's patient, biding its time, and a very gentle, almost imperceptible wave of gratitude wash over me. And then my vision darkened like I had closed my eyes. I knew that wasn't it, though. I could still feel the dryness on my eyeballs, like thin strands of cotton. And next thing I knew, I was sitting in my mother's lap, looking right in her face. She faced away from me, still watching the TV as Rod Serling was saying that with all its faults, it may well be that this is the best of all possible worlds. I said, Mom, and I could hear it. In my own voice, I could hear myself say, Mom. To my right, I could also hear a groan, a mumble of some kind. And my mom turned her head, and I heard her say, oh, Christ, now what? Only she didn't say it. And then I blacked out again, or whatever you call it when a coma patient blacks out. I don't know. And then I was back in bed. I could feel my mom rub my shoulder a few times. It had been the next night for all I know. But the first thing I thought of was my mom's voice, but not her voice. Whatever it was that said, oh, Christ, now what? I mean, she thought it, but I heard it. I sat in her lap, but I moaned from the bed. I was surprised by how well I took the whole thing. Like, it was kind of a shitty thing for her to say or even think, but I didn't take it personally. The lady was watching her teenage son grow into a young vegetable. You'd probably be pretty short-tempered too if that was happening to you. No, it didn't matter. She was my mom and she loved me, but that didn't matter. She was tired, but she'd in the park. Lupo looked over his shoulder in time to see one little redheaded kid take a mean hip check and land face first in the snow. He just laid there. The other kids ignored him. Lupo had half turned around to go over there when the door creaked open behind him. A pair of violet eyes peered out at him from beneath jet black bangs. The eyes were a different color, but he recognized that scowl right away. Roxy, he said. She narrowed her eyes a bit. Do you remember me? Look, your aunt sent me out here. She's worried about you. So how is that your business? Lupo stood there looking down at this pair of eyes, which widened a little, and I like Elaine. I want to do her a favor. So please let me in so I can. The violet eyes stared at him some more, and then she let the door swing wide. Fine. She led him through a cluttered apartment. There were 2 big bookshelves in the living room, books spilling from them like paper waterfalls. The shelves were more like book habit trails than anything else, books puttering along them over and under each other, carving their own paths, massing in piles around the corners, stacks around the remaining wall space. And at a glance, Lupo could see archaeology texts, a copy of The Good Earth, what looked like a complete set of the Time Life series Enchanted World, pulled apart like the prow of a ship through fog. A black and white TV sat precariously atop a stack of books, all of which appeared to be about fishing. The familiar wah-wah pedal of the Three's Company theme song was tinny and weak on the crackly set. Lupo watched for a second as Janet accidentally watered Chrissy's back. So, Roxy said, talk. She was almost as tall as he now, 15 years and change since he'd seen her last, one socked foot rubbing the other as she stood there, arms folded. She wore a black hooded sweatshirt that was at least one size too big for her, the hood up over her ears. She had broad shoulders, but when she remembered to, she stood with them back, her ample chest forward. She wore gray sweatpants with a mud stain on one thigh. One hand would occasionally rest on it, like the hand was more embarrassed about it than the rest of her was. She smoked Parliament Lights. Lupo nodded and cleared a stack of Mad magazines off the end of the couch. Roxy took an ashtray and folded herself into a sheet-covered armchair, her legs underneath her. She tapped her cigarette against the rim of the ashtray. The studio audience laughed as Jack tripped over the couch. So who's this dude? What dude? This dude you're living with, the one Elaine's, the one she doesn't like. Roxy snorted, her smile warped around her cigarette. Oh, is that what this is? I thought she was going to try and get me to go back to school or some shit. This is about Park? Lupo nodded. Roxy made a fart noise. Wasting your time, then. Well, what does he do? What do? You. I tend to things. She slunk back into the chair. So does he. Lupo nodded. Roxy stubbed the cigarette out in the ashtray. Look, buddy, you did what you said you would do. You came up here and talked to me, and now you can go back and tell my aunt you did your best, and she'll pat you on the head like a good boy. Lupo looked at her. One corner of her mouth went up, and for a moment, he saw that little kid she used to be. That was before the Johnny Mulvihill thing. She chuckled a little and said, as it is, though, I have no plans to leave here, to leave him. He's the only one who cares about me, and I'm all he's got, too. Elaine cares about you. Could have fooled me. I mean, she sent me up here. That's something. Roxy lit another cigarette. Not much. Lupo looked down at his hands. That's true, I guess. Roxy laughed again. You're not very good at this sort of thing, are you? Lupo sighed. I guess not. Man, Roxy said. Elaine sure can pick 'em. 14. When my brain wasn't napping, and when I just have to lay there as it geared itself up, I tried to remember the name of this one Roald Dahl short story. I must have been 9 years old or so when I read it, and I remembered it very clearly except for the title. It's the story of this guy who's kind of a scumbag, a degenerate gambler, and in order to be an even better degenerate gambler, he begins meditating so that he can learn to read minds. And it works. He becomes an even better gambler because he can mentally see through the backs of playing cards and stuff. But then he realizes that gambling is an empty thrill, and he would be more satisfied, more fulfilled if he uses newfound powers to help people. So he uses his vast riches to open a bunch of top-of-the-line orphanages, and he's celebrated as a great philanthropist. I remember telling the story to Lupo once while we were playing Nintendo, and he just said, weird. And I said, yeah, I guess it kind of is. I eventually remembered the name of the story, but by then it mattered even less. 15. The mining district was Fort Lewis City's oldest and until recently most dangerous neighborhood. It was here in 1801 that Seth Fortlow discovered a rich vein of lead, especially rich for this part of the country. And it was here in 1991 that the violent crime rate was highest in Fort Lewis City by at least 13%.
There were 3 murders for every one anywhere else in the city, and rapes and muggings were as common a greeting as good morning. Drive-bys hit the town like the latest dance craze, and the standard white flight became more of a rainbow coalition of fear as any family of any race that could scrape the money together fled the mining district. An enterprising young city councilwoman by the name of Tara Grimsrud, though, had been pressing for revitalization of this historic district, and with the quiet financial backing of one Michael G. Braddock, she got her wish, and Uncle Mickey got filthy rich on backdoor construction contracts and insurance policies that specialized in protection. The slums were torn down, the condos went up, and everybody was happy. Smoke shops and clothing boutiques, cute little cupcake places, and pizza parlors open till the wee hours. Weekends were beautiful shoulder to beautiful shoulder throughout, and often other beautiful body parts met as well. It was such a popular night spot that even a few days before New Year's Eve, there was little parking and a lot of partying. Plenty of civilians. Younger Dave smashed another beer bottle on the corner. The shards of green glass bejeweled the piles of dirty snow they spent the last hour clearing off the patio. "Hey, kid," Skinny said, "you want to get us fucking busted?" He stood on his board on the lip of the empty pool, trying to catch his breath before he dropped in again. Younger Dave smirked. "Come on, man. Older Dave ain't gonna say nothing. Not on regular Dave's birthday, kid. I'll clean it up." They all knew he wouldn't. The circle jerks blared tinnily from his portable MP3 player. Regular Dave sat in one of the deck chairs he'd pulled his way up here. He still shivered. Fuck it, he thought. Fuck the cold anyways. Older Dave almost got fired last time he let them skate the balcony pool. His manager had made a surprise inspection that night, first catching older Dave sleeping behind the security desk in the lobby, then catching Skinny and the other 2 Daves coming down the fire escape with their boards under their arms. If older Dave's manager wasn't also his half-brother, he'd have been fired for sure. But since it was regular Dave's birthday, older Dave let them down. Now only 20 years old, regular Dave still had another year before he could really sample the nightlife. Fuck it. Regular Dave gazed out at the city, the lights reflecting weakly back at themselves in the glass balustrade. From here, his reflection looked like it was sitting on the roof of that water bottle in the plant 5 blocks years behind older Dave. Birthday between Christmas and New Year's. The mezzanine life. Regular Dave knocked back the rest of his beer and set the empty down next to his... For what? Regular Dave shrugged. He put his beer down. But as he stood, something caught his ear, something behind the music coming out of the cheap speakers. It was a whistling, a high, steady whistling getting louder and louder. Skinny said, "What?" Regular Dave said, "You don't hear that, kid?" Skinny, "You know the earth is going to crash into the sun, but that's no reason why we shouldn't have a little fun." The whistling turned to shrieking, and then 2 dudes fell out of the sky. They landed in the pool, and the mere force of it blew younger Dave clear up and over the lip. He landed on his ass and slid back into the wall. He immediately folded his legs beneath him like a kid in timeout, his jaw trembling just a bit. "Holy fuck," Skinny said. "We gotta go, kid. We're gonna get busted." But he and regular Dave stood frozen where they were. They were big, these dudes. 2 huge fucking dudes beating the shit out of each other at the bottom of the pool. One dude, it's empty by the way, one dude was all in black, wearing a pea coat, and the other dude wore a vest with no shirt. And he was laughing. Holy fuck, this psycho was laughing. "Holy fuck," Skinny said again, and the dude in the pea coat looked up at him for just 1 second, his face going from a snarl to a confused frown to getting socked right in the chin. Passed over him. The laughing dude ran up the side of the pool and jumped out, landing on his feet with his arms out like a tap dancer in an old movie or something. But then with a laugh, he lowered his head and charged regular Dave. Regular Dave took a single step back, but then his knees locked. His legs felt nothing but pins and needles. The laughing dude came at him, and regular Dave could see the tattoo on his chest. The tattoo was slick with sweat and blood. Regular Dave could smell it from where he was. The Jurassic Park logo? That T-Rex skeleton smiling at him, laughing at him. Regular Dave began to cry. The dude in the pea coat threw him to the ground, and regular Dave felt his arm almost pop out of its shoulder. He rolled over once, twice with the force of being thrown, but he lifted his head in time to see, through hot tears in his eyes, the laughing dude tackled the dude in the pea coat around his midsection and keep running. They both smashed to the balustrade, and the laughing dude's giggles floated back up to them, almost gently. Skinny said, "Holy fuck." Regular Dave just laid there. He could feel his legs again, but now his arm was numb, hung off of him like a sack of dead meat. But he barely noticed that now. All he could think was that they needed to get off this mezzanine, off this patio, out of this building. Weird Al said, and a pinch to grow an inch. There's a little drum fill like that. 16. Over the wind whistling past their ears, Park, and they fell back and tore through it to the sidewalk. A holly streamer shook from the canopy and floated down around him. Park landed on the windshield of a little car, and it dented around him, pebbles of broken glass splashing up like water droplets and landing in his eyes. Oh, man, he said, wiping his face. Time out! Lupo picked up a car and smashed it down on top of him. It was only a Geo Metro, but Lupo was beginning to feel the strain in his shoulders and his calves. His shins felt like they were splitting up the middle, and the back of his head felt like his foot after he'd been sitting on it for too long. The back tires of the Geo spun slowly, impotently at the sky. The Geo's alarm and the alarm of the car beneath it sang a discord melody. The shoulder of Lupo's peacoat was coming apart at the seam, and the whole thing reeked of Chinese food, so he shrugged it off and let it drop to the street. Man, he said, that really hurt. You smashed me with a car, man. Lupo stood there, not taking his eyes off of him, but struggling inside to even out his breathing. Park got to his feet and stood tall, shoulders back. Then he held up one finger, turned his head to the side, and puked. When he was done, he smiled at Lupo. A long, thin, yellow string of saliva dangled from his chin. How many times? Lupo said. How many times what, Lupo Danish? How many times, Lupo said, are you going to pause for effect like that? Park threw shoulder down. As fast as Park was, Lupo had a brief second where he could have dodged him, could have rolled to the side. Instead, he drew in a breath and flexed his abdominal muscles. Park rammed his shoulder into Lupo's diaphragm, and Lupo flew off his feet, wrapping his arms around Park's shoulders. There was a cloud of plaster dust as they pounded into the front wall of the coffee place across the street, a display of Earth First ceramic mugs inside, shattering musically to the floor. Lupo brought his ankles together behind Park's back and jammed an elbow between his shoulder blades. Park grunted and slammed Lupo to the ground, and then ripped apart. Lupo jumped back, and the tip of the meter grazing the front of his shirt. When Park swung it back, Lupo caught it with one hand and tore it from Park's grip. It clattered to the middle of it, was up into his brain. Park just laughed, so Lupo hit him again, his fists beginning to fly, trading accuracy for speed and force. Park was so tickled by this, he brought his knee up into Lupo's balls. Lupo kept his feet, but he felt his scrotum trying to retreat out of his asshole. Park brought his head up into the underside of Lupo's chin, and blood spurted from between his teeth as he bit his tongue. Lupo gave Park a jab to the kidneys and brought his knee up, trying to get Park's face, but only hitting his breastbone. It bought him enough space to whip around, run across the street, try to get his bearings before turning around. Park leapt across the street, fist first. Lupo caught his fist with both hands and threw him over his head. Park clipped the corner of the Rockwell building on Aristotle and 53rd, brick stay something. She was just going to shoot him down, which, despite what so many men seemed to think, was no fun for her. Still, it was better than this in-between, this no man's land where she was rendered merely an object, or at least her ass was. He wasn't being disgusting, nor was he disgusting to look at. In fact, if she weren't so tired, she might even chat him up herself. Benefit of the doubt about that. What exactly he was staring at, Des wasn't sure. Wrapped up in this overcoat, her knit hat pulled down almost to the bridge of her nose, she thought she looked like a tube of Pillsbury, if anything. Times like this, she wished she'd just let her father buy her that car. She wouldn't have had to pick anything fancy, something used, something eco-friendly, something that would get her to and from work and maybe afford her a bit more of a social life than being visually groped at a bus stop. The bus pulled to the curb, and Des was disappointed that it was so empty, that it was just going to be her and Dreamboat over here. A big ad on the side of the bus for a travel agency showed a Caribbean sunset, and Des felt an ache throb through her. A woman's silhouette danced on the beach above the words, "Escape to the ordinary." She'd only been to a beach once, years ago, visiting distant relatives in South Carolina when she was a little girl. She remembered standing for how the ocean, relentless and patient, had not eaten the beach, the parking lot, the city. She stood and watched it like it was a tiger in a cage on her back, a newspaper cone of fish and chips warming her hands. She took a breath and began to approach as the bus knelt down with a pneumatic hiss. But then she jumped as a boom and crash thundered from up the block. Car horns blared, and it was like they were crawling right under her neck skin and into her inner ear. But then, before her startled eyes, two men crashed through the other side of the bus. The bus tires made a terrible rippling sound as they rubbed up against the curb, the warbly Caribbean sun pulsing at her, and the bus began rocking its undercarriage against the concrete. Des's knees went semi-solid as she watched the two very large, very bloodied men destroy the bus from the inside, like two feral panthers in a clothes dryer. Their fists and kicks went wild, denting the bus from the inside. Glass and paneling shattered. The one in the vest put the one in all black's head through a pole, popping it right out of the ceiling. The one in black kicked the legs out from under the one in the vest, smashing him through a bench seat. The bus driver fled just before the one in all black was smashed into the fare collector. Des turned to watch the bus driver waddle quickly away, but never running, as though she were afraid to attract attention to herself. Then there was a burst of glass shattered, and Des found herself covered in bits of it like confetti from a parade, littering her hair, her collar. She looked up into the upside-down face of the one in the vest, who'd been knocked backwards through the window. He grinned at her, and blood ran from his split upper lip and into his nose. "Hey there, beautiful," he said. Every guy Des had ever dated called her that. Everyone had used that as a pet name, and all of them, as nice as most of them were also thoroughly delusional as to how badass they were. This guy, on the other hand, this guy who had just had his head put through 2 layers of safety glass and was now hitting on her, he clearly knew exactly who he was. And now, so did she. She bit her lower lip, but a whimper still escaped her. He giggled at her, and she felt her face grow hot. Then the guy in all black grabbed him by the hair and threw him out of the other side of the bus, climbing through the hole they'd first torn into his side. A woman across the street screamed. The guy who had been checking her out said, Are you okay?" "Don't touch me," she said. Escape to the ordinary. "Are you okay?" She turned. "I said, do not touch me." That's just what I assume most women are thinking when I hit on them. Am I right, ladies? All right, 18. On 55th, there was a lot more traffic, the oft-popular Double Five strip of bars and restaurants doing brisk business. Park landed at the feet of a bachelorette party trying to hail a cab. "Evening, ladies," Park said, taking a brief moment to look up their dresses. Lupo came barreling around the corner, and Park grabbed the nearest young woman by the ankle. "Just going to borrow you," bewildered to even scream. The novelty. Park stood and swung the girl at Lupo like a club. She was too bewildered. Park backswung the girl at him again, her limbs flailing in impossible direction. Lupo caught her and threw her behind himself, scraping her knees, but she was no further worse for the wear. The rest of the bachelorettes stood there, like a Macy's display in their winter coats, one with her cab hailing arm still raised. Park began throwing them at Lupo, one at a time, and Lupo had to juggle them to the ground, doing his best to see they didn't hit the curb with their heads. "I got a never-ending supply over here, Chief," Park said. "Look at this moron." The guy was pointing a camera phone at them from about 20 feet away. "All right, Mr. DeMille, ready for my close-up," Park said, and punched through the guy's phone into his teeth. Lupo saw the guy's mouth split around Park's fist, his eyes roll up into his head. "God damn it," Lupo muttered. "God damn it, shit." "Oh, man," Park said and looked over at Lupo. "Hey, I'm stuck here." Lupo grabbed him by the hair and pulled him away. The guy, free of Park's haymaker, dropped to the ground, his mouth now a gaping void. And then the situation began to sink in for the crowd. People screamed, they shouted, they began running, punched him in the face. Park laughed. Lupo kept punching him in the face until he stopped laughing. "You got no sense of humor, Lupo Danish," Park said through a mouthful of teeth and blood. "That must be why your hair is always so nice." And then he kicked Lupo's kneecap almost through the back of his leg. "Oh, boys, just talk it out." 19. Uncle Mickey hired this nurse to come in once a day and roll me over and rub salve on my bed sores and stuff. She was this tiny Puerto Rican lady who hummed constantly and loved Jesus. Over the weeks, I found out her name was Concepcion, and she had a daughter back in San Juan, and her daughter's father was a real piece of shit. Also, when Concepcion was 7, a neighbor lady would invite her over to play in the backyard sprinklers and would then sit in a deck chair and openly masturbate as Concepcion ran back and forth through the spray, her bathing suit clinging to her like plastic wrap. I never did figure out the song Concepcion always hummed as she took care of me. It was just something she heard in church one day. Just trying to convey that Georgie can read minds. I forgot how disgusting that example. He'd come in every now and again and bring my mom a sandwich, and then he'd look down at me, and it was like being stared at by a wax figure. But even though I couldn't see him, even though he was there and I couldn't see him, I knew my uncle well enough to know that he was going to try and have sex with Concepcion. Once upon a time, I might have thought that was cool, even, less so as I got to be a teenager. Maybe it was because they weren't much older than me by that point, and the sight of me made them feel weird. I don't know. I do know that I began to resent them right back. And so I always thought it was funny when Uncle Mickey would do shit like kick them out of the apartment after making them cook dinner or stuff like that. Concepcion, aside from simply being a nice person, was just there to do her job. This had happened to her a lot, clients or clients' relatives wanting a quickie in the guest room or something. And she usually obliged them, thinking somewhere in her head that it was part of the job, nursing an orgasm out of these men, bereaved as the rabbits cavort in a cartoon field, all la-la-laing along to the Banana Splits theme song. Feel free to cue that up. A cartoon sun smiles down, wearing a cartoon pair of sunglasses. The bunnies roll and tumble over each other, and all drink from martini glasses full of blood. I find Uncle Mickey naked behind a tree, dancing by himself on the balls of his feet. A voice out of the sky says he keeps getting redder at the same time smaller, like it's being shrunken by a voodoo priest. He says, what do you think, I'm playing games? I try to say what I'm here to say, that he needs to stay away from Concepcion, from Lupo, from anybody and everybody. But I can't think with that music. That fucking music. 1 banana, 2 banana, 3 banana, 4. 4 bananas make a bunch of so many more. Uncle Mickey says, I need to be left alone. Why don't you just leave me alone? And then he throws an old radio at me. I start to fade out, my body becoming translucent, transparent. The bunnies, blood mustaches on their lips, began to swarm over Uncle Mickey. He says, why don't they just leave me alone with my dream? My brain napped for so long after that the Twilight Zone programming had cycled all the way back around to the Shelley Berman episode. In the mirror, Shelley's own reflection said to him, it's preying on you now, isn't it? I mean, the quiet, the emptiness. It's a good episode. My mom sniffled, but I couldn't tell if she was crying or just had a cold. I had a male nurse now, a hulking white guy named Sven, 20. Lupo chased him around the corner, his knee a distant but pulsating throb. He put a hand on a corner trash can shaped like a mining cart just to get his bearings. And when he looked up, Park whipped a manhole cover at his face like a frisbee. Oh, I actually was going to cue a song up for this part. Maybe I'll give it a go. There's only one person, and I'm assuming it's you, boy. So let me find the song. Ooh, this book has become interactive. Also, I'm sorry if I gave away that was Georgie too soon before I actually gave it away. I'm actually doing some minor editing on this thing as I do this. Okay. 20. Lupo chased him around the corner, his knee a distant but pulsating throb. He put a hand on the corner trash can shaped like a mining cart just to get his bearings. And when he looked up, Park whipped a manhole cover at his face like a frisbee. Its gray, rounded side caught Lupo between the eyes, actually making a gonging sound in Lupo's skull. The cover rattled and spun to the ground like a flipped coin. He fell against the trash can, its cement wheels frozen into the sidewalk, slumped there in the cinnamon snow like a Thursday night drunk. Excuse me. His vision swam, doubled, fuzzed out like a TV with foil rabbit ears. Excuse me again. And then it righted itself, became even clearer, like he was now wearing glasses he had never realized he needed. He stepped off the curb into the street towards Park. He forgot his knee had almost been folded backwards and his face twisted at a jab of pain like a fork in his cartilage. He paused and stepped forward again. He could hear his breath in his throat, the blood in his ears, the sweat on his lip. He could hear the murmurs of people near him buzzing like gnats. A pretty woman looked at him from beneath a fur hat, one hand raised in front of her like she was going to try and touch him, like see if he was really there. That's the right song, but not the right version. He could hear something else also, quietly at first, but then increasing in volume. A song began to play, an acoustic guitar, a simple drum beat, a synthesizer bass line. The tune was catchy, and when the vocalist began to sing, the keyboards followed along. Volcanoes inside my head. Volcanoes inside my head. The music was clear, not a pop or a skip, no feedback of a PA. Sorry. I'm trying to play it as low as I can. The music was clear, not a pop or a skip, no feedback of a PA. There was no band in sight, not even a lone street musician. Lupo looked up at Park in the middle of the street, boots scraping the wet street as he slid back, the moonwalk. He clapped along to the beat, so that meant at least he could hear it. It wasn't just in Lupo's head. The snow on the ground, far from being melted charcoal, was white, blinding almost, crunching under his feet like bleached cornflakes. The streetlights glowed clear yellow, almost perfect cones of gold, 360-degree circles of light on the pavement. The neon signs of the businesses on the block hummed with beauty. Drink, eat, dance, live, they said to him. Volcanoes inside my head. Volcanoes inside my head. The people on the street, on the sidewalks, began shuffling themselves into a circle around Park. All the party people, all the party servants, guys in suits, busboys in aprons, magazine stand owners in knit caps, women in dresses, pizza delivery guys got out of their cars and shimmied their shoulders. Pedicab drivers dismounted and shook their booties. Taxi hacks abandoned their cabs, but not before opening the doors for their fares, twirling them out into the street. They all had looks of amusement, eyes closed, hearing nothing but their own breath in their lungs and the clap of their own hands. Lupo looked up at the pretty woman in the fur hat, also clapping along, her head cocked slightly to the side, pitying him. If it feels bad, screw it. Lupo pushed off from the mailbox into the street. The people were all clapping along now. Clap, 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 clap. So I don't know if that was the right beat. Some were tapping their toes as well, but most were still getting into position around. The people parted their circle, allowing him into the middle to meet Park. And this is where he's supposed to be singing the melting my brain line. We didn't do this in rehearsal, though. They closed their loop behind him, and then with a 4 count, they all began dancing. They shimmied their shoulders up to the left, then to the right, then a clap over their heads. And then again, shimmy, shimmy, clap, clap, clap. Lupo looked up and saw people on fire escapes, on rooftops, on balconies, all dancing in sync. As far as he could see, Fort Low City danced for him. Danced at him? Danced at him. Insanity swirling around this drain. He took a step toward Park and immediately began to list to the left like a boat with a stuck rudder. He corrected himself before he toppled into an oblivious young couple. He stood there breathing, watching Park moonwalk back and forth just yards away. He took another step, more slowly this time, and Park beckoned with curled fingers. The people continued to dance as the song faded out, but as the music got softer, they began to drift farther away, their circle around Park and Lupo stretching and pulling like taffy. As the song continued to fade, their dancing began to turn to jogging, and then to running, and then to fleeing. They were fleeing. Lupo watched, his head now throbbing where the bass line had once been. Park said, "If it feels good, do it." Lupo turned and lunged for him. His cold fingers pawed at Park's vest, but then he was falling. Park watched Lupo recede into the darkness of the open sewer. The splash he made echoed back up at him. "Oh shit," Park said under his breath. I didn't really like the film Dancer in the Dark, but you wouldn't be able to tell that from that chapter. Maybe that was just a reference for me. Her breath shot out in staggered puffs from between her chattering teeth. "Looks like they're closed." "Huh," Lupo said. "It's kind of early for that." "Peace." "Huh," you said. "Yeah," she said. "Can we get out of here? I'm about to freeze my tits off." He smiled down at her. She wore a thick wool coat and one of those crocheted hats far back on her head. She wore glasses tonight, and her shoulders were up around her ears, so she looked tiny but with big eyes. Lupo wanted to pick her up and put her in his pocket. "Yeah," he said, "whatever you want to do." She smiled up at him. "Come on," she said, And as she began to walk down the street, she reached back without looking and grabbed his hand out of his coat pocket and pulled him along. He also couldn't feel, through her knit gloves, he could feel how cold her hands were. He also couldn't feel anything below his waist. He even smiled at an old couple as they passed. The twittery feeling in his belly, though, receded a bit when he saw where she was dragging him. It was a little hole in the wall called the Sailor's Delight. It used to be. I've been here before, Lupo thought. And he had just killed Jerry Morrow. He'd gone to meet with him, just like Mr. Braddock had asked, and just like Mr. Braddock had expected, Jerry's mouth got the best of him. He called Lupo a faggot, said that it was his fault Georgie Boy was in a coma, and what did Lupo want to do about it? Lupo had punched Jerry Morrow in the face so hard that the last thing Jerry saw before he died was the swimsuit calendar on the wall directly behind him. After that, the strip club skim that Jerry used to deliver to Mr. Braddock returned to and stayed at the acceptable levels. All the skims did. No one wanted Mr. Braddock's new boogeyman to come a-calling. Lupo was aware of his rep in the same way he was aware that women on a whole earned less than men, that the illiteracy rate in this country was staggering. He was aware of it, but it didn't really bother him, and it bothered him that it didn't really bother him. So he walked around a lot. It was a cool spring night, and Lupo walked with his hands stuffed in his pockets, his shoulders up by his ears. He kept his eyes on the sidewalk as he passed by lovers, young and old, couples out for the evening, enjoying the weather and one another's company. Lupo walked past the old Rexalls that had been closed down for a couple years. The window, Lupo looked at the ground, but he could still see his reflection staring at him, a grin of mock pity twisting its reflected face. "Fuck you," Lupo muttered at the ground. Lupo walked on, his mood deepening along with the night. He walked unmolested through the city, past roving gangs of teenage thugs, a few brave enough to holler at him when he was half a block away. Past the Dominicans playing cards in their stoops, their intense Spanish chatter becoming whispers as he approached. Past the nickel and dime whores, each of them casting doleful stares at him, as if he was another teen cherry fresh off the bus, barely worth their pity. Past two people in an alleyway who were fucking and or fighting, and paused momentarily to make sure Lupo would walk on. Past the buildings and the dumpsters, past the fuss on the car radio. But as he walked past the Sailor's Delight, he heard something different. It was familiar, but in an unfamiliar way, like when a neighbor that you rarely speak with grows a beard. He stopped walking and frowned up at the neon sign over the door, 21 and up. The music pumping out of the bar was distinctly rock and roll in nature, but it didn't feel abrasive or aggressive, not in the way that Lupo usually thought of rock, like not pounding. The guitar was clean, not all distorted and rife with feedback. It echoed back on itself, and there were no vocals. Lupo had heard stuff like this before, he thought, but he'd certainly never listened to it. There was a fat guy sitting on a bar stool in front of the door. He looked at Lupo with a strained expression of boredom. Lupo asked him, "What is this?" The guy frowned. "What's what?" "This," Lupo said, pointing inside. "This music." "Oh," the door guy said, "it's the longboards from Spain." "Yeah," Lupo said, "but what is this? What are they playing?" The door guy shrugged and then frowned. "You mean this song? I don't know what it... Or do you mean surf?" "Surf?" Lupo said. The door guy nodded. "Yeah, man, surf music. Instrumentals, like Dick Dale and shit." Lupo just frowned back at him. "Well, I'll tell you what, big guy, it's a $5 cover. Why don't you come in and find out for yourself?" "Yeah," Lupo said. "Yeah, okay." Predictably, the bar sported a nautical theme. Wood-paneled walls, old ship's wheels above the doorway, many Jolly Rogers waving in rows from streamers. The music was too loud for conversation, but people went at it anyway, screaming conversationally, though to Lupo it just looked like they were opening their mouths at each other. It wasn't too packed, and the crowd parted for Lupo easily, spreading like water before the prow of a ship. The band on stage were three young guys who looked distinctly foreign to Lupo. It wasn't just because of their dark complexions, but they also had that confused look etched into their faces of strangers in a strange land. There was a beautiful moment, though, before any of that sunk in, that Lupo became something he so rarely felt, simply present. The bass guitar went tunka 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 tunka, and the guitar went beedle deedle deedle deedle, and the drums went boom papa boom papa boom. And there was no knucklehead screaming into a microphone, no blaring horn section calling attention to itself. Just three dudes and their instruments. And the music picked Lupo up from beneath the floorboards, rising beneath his feet, and it carried him along, and he felt the sun ended and things went weird. The crowd was enjoying the show, that was for sure, and they were hammered. Next to Lupo, near the front of the stage, was a group of three guys, young white dudes. They said, "Yeah, yeah," and Lupo thought they were German for a minute, until one raised his glass at him and said, "Nazia drove." I don't know how to speak Russian. Ruskies. Fine. Hey, the Cold War had been over for a few years, but now Lupo saw why the band was. Lupo had never been so confused, nor had the guitarist for the Longboards. It's a real surf band from Spain. They are excellent. One of the Rusky kids said, "You don't sing, man." In that goofy accent, all the vowels clipped and retarded. I can't do the accent. The guitarist frowned at him. English probably his second language, if not third. The Rusky kid said, "You give me mic, I sing." He threw back a shot of vodka, a stereotype, right down to his choice of beverage. "I sing in Russian." The guitarist smiled, his brow creased. He looked over at his bass player, as did the Rusky kid. "I sing in Russian," he said to the bass player. "I like you guys, so I sing for you. I'm Russian, I sing for you." The guitarist said something in Spanish, but clearly with a big question mark at the end. The bass player answered back in their native language, and then he said to the Rusky with a bit of a lisp, "No vocals, man. No mic." Suddenly Lupo was not, but then I think about that I think that about almost everything now. Seriously, what's the big deal? 23, she climbed on. He went to take her coat, and she pulled her shoulders away from him. "No," she said, "I'm not staying long." "Oh," Lupo said. "Oh, okay." "Hi," she said to the bartender. "A vodka cranberry, please, and whatever my friend here wants." "Tonic water, please," Lupo said. "So," Elaine said once her drink arrived and she'd taken a big bite out of it, "did you see Roxy?" Lupo poked the ice in his glass with a swizzle stick. "Yeah, went up and saw her yesterday." "And?" I shrugged. "I don't know, Elaine. I don't know what to tell you. She wasn't much interested in what I had to say." "And what about this guy? Did you talk to him?" Lupo shook his head. "He wasn't there." "Oh," Elaine said, knocking back another big chunk of her drink. "So this whole thing was kind of a wash. Are you?" "No, look," she said and laughed, an arid laugh. "Okay." It dawned on me when, well, I don't know when exactly, but it dawned. No, it's true. Roxy is her own person, and frankly, as close as we might have been when she was a kid, I don't really know her anymore. If anything, I was making some effort for my mom, but not even that really. I just don't care, Lupo. Lupo opened his mouth to argue with her, but then he said, "Yeah, I know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Elaine finished her drink and set it carefully back on its coaster, keeping it near her. "Listen, Lupo, I caught." "Yeah," Lupo said and poked at his ice some more. "But that's not it." "No, that's it," Lupo said. "That's my job. That's what I do." "I know," she said, "but that's not why I called you." She took his glass and moved it away. She placed a hand on his leg. "Lupo," she said. "Yeah. Take me home." Lupo exhaled. "Okay." 24. Why did I write this character? "You all right, Mac?" Schlachta smothered the next bite of his breakfast, emitted a burst of static, and they both perked up their ears. All units, 1031, repeat 1031, vicinity of 55th, please respond." Mac looked at his partner. Schlachta grimaced. Hell with that, we're on lunch." Mac nodded, turned away so he wouldn't have to watch Schlachta humiliate that burrito further. Well, since Irene had left, he supposed. He still missed his old tank, his clownfish and his damsels and his prized large angelfish. But this tank he watched for hours on end. He was pretty close to just canceling his cable altogether. All units, 1031 upgraded to 1035. Repeat 1035 in progress, Aristotle and 55th. All units respond. Mr. Braddock had delivered that tank himself, the first time Mac had met him. Schlachta had laid out how the mining district beat worked his first week riding with him. This part of town was Braddock's. They were just keeping an eye on it for him. It was their job, Schlachta and Mac and the other boys, to see that it stayed that way. They worked for Braddock, who himself worked for the civilians. Sure, he just needed a job. And once Irene had their divorce papers delivered to him while he was in the academy, Mac didn't even really care about that. He just needed a way to feed his fish, which, as he found out, Irene had taken in the settlement along with almost all of his stuff. Excuse me. Mac's ringtone sounded. De La Soul's Tread Water. He ignored it. Phone's ringing, Schlachta said through a mouthful. But then, one night after his shift, Mac was sitting around in his box. Hey there, Mickey Braddock here. Michael Braddock here. I don't know why he uses full name. Oh, right, hi. Yeah, good. Hey, listen, we were just in the neighborhood. And, I heard that your old lady had split. Is that right? Yeah, Mac said. Yeah. Right, well, don't get all emotional on me. Anyways, me and my boy here just thought you could use some cheering up, so we brought you a little something. Mac's phone went tread water, tread water. There's a lot of songs in this chapter, in this section. You gonna fucking answer that or what? Schlachta said. Mac looked at the display. Agostini. Yeah, Mac said. Into the phone. Braddock's dead, Agostini said. What? Mac said. Schlachta looked at him. Yeah, he's gone. Fucking head blown off over here. What? Schlachta said. Braddock's dead, Mac said. Ah, fuck. Schlachta tossed his breeder out the window and started the prowler. I guess they'll be on this side. We're on our way, Mac said. No, we're not, Schlachta said as he hit the siren and U-turned in the middle of the street. No, we're not, Mac said into the phone and hung up. Why are we not? All units, respond now, Schlachta pointed at the radio. Use your fucking head, Cherry. If Braddock's dead, who the fuck you think is tearing up the goddamn city right now? Of course. Lupo Danish had hauled in McClellan's brand new tank by himself, cradled in his arms like a box of oranges. Except it wasn't oranges. It was a 15-gallon tank, and it was full. Water, live rock, turtle grass, fish. Live rock? 3 purple firefish darted around, looking to escape to calmer waters. Where do you want it? Lupo said, and then he saw the blank spot on the case and hauled it over. He was hunched over a bit with the weight of it, but how he was able to carry it at all, Mac could never figure. Braddock clapped him on the shoulder, and McClellan jumped. That's from me to you, Mac, Mr. Braddock said and smiled. We're like a family. Isn't that right, Lupo Dupo? Lupo glared at him, at both of them. That's right, Mr. Braddock had said. As he buckled his seatbelt, Mac realized he was only kind of sorry that Braddock was dead. They whipped past the Vantage Point apartments on 53rd, and the only people on the street were 3 skater kids haul-assing in the other direction. 54th was empty as well, and they flew by a bus that looked like it had been shelled by German artillery. Civilians were still fleeing 55th, where 2 other radio cars were already on the scene, parked in the middle of the street. Mac and Schlachta were out of the car almost before it stopped. Hey, Schlachta said. Hey, I ain't fucking paid enough to eat this shit sandwich. Schlachta lunged for Laughlin, and Mac had to hold him back, forgetting how much power his civilians out of the way. You see any civilians around? Mac hated to admit when this asshole was right, but right he was. He couldn't tell if the ground beneath his feet was shaking or if it was just him. Laughlin said, Braddock couldn't last forever. You guys knew that. And even the idiots in this fucking city know what to do now that the days of rage have arrived. He laughed and said, all we got to do is mop up after, so fuck it, right? Schlachta breathed through his nose, his jaw tight. But then he said, fuck it. He looked at Mac. Mac shrugged, hoping they couldn't see him trembling. Fuck it, he said. 25. The brown-green water splashed up around Lupo, the odor choking him more than anything. He shook his head and watched his vision clear, the searing ammonia and shit smell clearing his sinuses. Park Harple leapt through the open manhole, cackling. Ha 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 ha! He said, let's take this. Lupo punched him in the mouth, and Park flew backwards, his arms crossing at the elbows with the force of it. He landed in the water 40 feet away and pulled. Oh, sorry. Lupo charged him, his legs sluicing through the water, a small rooster tail wake behind him. Park laughed again and threw him by the ears and drove Park's face into his good knee. Aw, hey, come on, Park said, but Lupo headbutted him hard enough that Lupo saw stars. Park by the arms and swung him around once, twice, then threw him into the brick wall of the sewer. I knew I liked that fighting move. I didn't realize I'd included it in this book so much. Park splatted there, stuck for a couple of seconds like cooked pasta, and then plopped to the walkway. Lupo jumped over the rail, a streak of water trailing from his body. Park was on his knees now. Wait a minute, he said, and Lupo stomped down on his face with his shoe, felt Park's nose completely give with a crunch. Foot on Park's ass he shoved. Park went face first into the ground. Lupo watched as he pushed himself up and kept crawling. Park said, blah, 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 man. Lupo frowned for a second until he realized his vision had gone purple, that he could feel his ears vibrating, that he could feel the water in his hair evaporating into steam. Park was speaking a language, actual English, but Lupo couldn't hear it. Lupo had become ignorant of all else. Fuck, Lupo said and knelt down beside Park. Park looked up at him and briefly smiled, blood running down his chin like a goatee. Lupo smiled back, took a hold of Park's hair, and dragged him away. 26. As Roxy reluctantly allowed Lupo Danish into the park, Park polished off his Cliff Bar and tossed the wrapper to the sidewalk. The cold wind made his few chest hairs bristle, but he just breathed it in, exposing more of his chest to the cold, let it out with a refreshed, bright and cold. Those were the best days, his favorite days. Vic and Glenn sat at their usual table by the front window, where Vic could stare out the tinted glass at the high school girls who passed by. Glenn, as usual, stared intently down at his phone, thumbs ablur over the keypad. Hey, there he is, the caveman kid, Vic said. He was beginning to bald, salt and pepper in the crown of hair he still sported. He rose and he wrapped Park in a bear hug, patting him on the back. Hey, he said to Glenn, we got company here. Glenn looked up, running a finger underneath his neat little mustache. His own hairline wasn't receding quite so much, but that was a dye job if Park had ever seen one. Don't we pay you enough to afford a shirt, son? Ah, Vic said with a wave. Come on, caveman, sit down. He pulled out a chair for Park, giving his shoulder a squeeze, his crow's foot eyes squinty with his smile. He ran a hand over his own head. He stared at Park for a bit and laughed. Kid, I just got to say it again. We are really pleased to have you on the team. The team, Glenn muttered with a curt chuckle. Park nodded. Yeah, me too, fellas. He crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair. The Vic and Glenn show was kind of boring sometimes, but Park certainly appreciated being appreciated. Even if Glenn was being his usual asshole self, Park knew Glenn would rather have him for them than against them. All right, well, Vic said with another laugh, we didn't bring you here just to suck your dick. The moves we've been making, Glenn and I, they've almost paid off. And of course, with you backing our plays, we got no worries, right, Glenn? That's right. Vic leaned in a little closer, lowered his booming voice a tad, even though there was no one else in the place. So, by our account, that just leaves two more pains in our neck. Houston and Braddock, Park said. Vic rubbed his chin and giggled, then slammed his hand on the table. Goddamn, Glenn, didn't I tell you? Kid knows what he's doing. Except when it comes to dressing himself. Now, see, kid, only thing we're concerned with is, well, those guys up in Flint, Marianne, the Rapids, Glenn said. The Rapids, Vic said. I know they were causing Glenn and me trouble, but for you, pushovers, Park said. Right, Vic said with a grin. Pushovers. But out in Forlow, Braddock's got a guy. Well, this guy, from what I understand, he ain't no pushover. Lupo Danish, Park said. Vic smiled. That's the guy. Park looked up at the ceiling for a moment, rubbing his fingers along his stubbled neck this side. And he leaned back down, putting his chair legs back on the floor. Vic, you think you can handle him? I can handle him, Vic. You just leave it to me. Vic patted his hand. You see, Glenn, kid's going to take us all the way. I don't like you, Harple. Park smiled. Not many do, Glenn. You may have flexed some muscle on our behalf, but I also got a good idea why your eyes are brown. I think it's just a matter of time before you make your own play. I think you're going to fuck us the first chance you get. Well, Glenn, I wish I could say you're the only critic of mine. But fortunately, what you think matters not one squirt of piss to me. Glenn's strong jaw jutted out a little further. Is that so? It's in paleontology. Ichnofossils, mostly. Glenn frowned. The hell is that? Trace fossils, Park said. Ancient footprints, shit like that. Love it. Anyways, one day I just decided I didn't want to do it anymore. All that shit, teaching, publishing, field work. It's a lot of hassle, and it's for who wasn't a miserable pile of shit. No offense. Glenn sat up in his chair. You better watch your mouth, Sonny. Park laughed but held up his hands. All right, look. You just seem pretty unhappy a lot of the time, and that's how every professor I ever knew was. They're all drunk or degenerate gamblers, or they fuck anything that moves. And I just didn't want any of that. I'm a happy guy, and I want to stay that way. So I just walked away from it, and now here I am. Glenn smoothed. Thing to worry about when it comes to you. Park touched the tip of his nose with one finger and pointed at Glenn with the other. Vic came out of the back room with a cardboard box full of books. Look what I got for the kid, he said. 27. Park Harple was chapter president of the new Student Peace Union, and in his junior year, he was awarded the coveted Fay Cooper Prize for his essay on the scientific inequities in the casualty count of the Bosnian War. He actively volunteered at the local library, conducting a children's story hour every Saturday, where he delighted the kids by acting out all the parts and doing silly voices in person to pull over and help. She was in deep shock, and Park took off his jacket and wrapped it around her, speaking to her in a low, soothing voice. Not even the paramedics could have told him later that if he hadn't been there with her, her weak heart would have given out completely. 28. There were 3 cop cars in the street as Lupo hauled first himself up and then Park, dangling from Lupo's fist by his hair. The cops stood there, hands on their guns, and Lupo looked at him, blinking sewage out of his eyes until he spotted a familiar face, one of Mr. Braddock's boys. You, Lupo said. What's your name? McClellan. Come take this away from me. The cop looked at Lupo for a long moment until a look of recognition crossed the cop's face and he took his hand off the butt of his pistol. As the cop approached, Lupo handed Park over by the hair. Park's limbs were like bags of mud hanging from his body. Park ripped the cop's gun belt off and began firing into the air through the holster. Caught you napping, assholes! He blew Officer McClellan's face off before Lupo could grab his wrist. Another of Park's shots went wild as they struggled, caroming off a stop sign. The two locked hands like high school wrestlers, sweat dribbling down their faces. Lupo began to get control, began to twist Park's forearm until the elbow popped. Park's fingers slipped and slipped on the trigger, unable to squeeze it. So he cracked Lupo on the bridge of the nose with his forehead. When Lupo let go of the gun, Park shot him in the thigh. We're on level ground now, Lupo Danish, he said. He yelled, his voice hoarse. And we're taking this all the way upstairs, homeboy. 29. Roxy rolled her eyes when she saw that he had another box full of used books. What? He said as he dropped them in the entry hall. A badly dog-eared copy of Jim Thompson's Now and on Earth flopped out and landed open and face down like a dirty butterfly. Roxy looked up at him. Sometimes she thought he looked sexy in that leather vest, but other times he looked more like he was in a Judas Priest cover band. More books, she said. He drew back like she'd taken a swing at him. Yeah, of course. Look, I got this sales book I didn't even know he'd written. It's in my closet. He hefted a 4-inch thick book out of the box, held it up, and smiled. A Moment in the Sun. It's a good book. Parking around their new rundown farmhouse, and it was just sinking in that maybe this wasn't the place for them. Green Acres. The studio audience laughed, and Park laughed too. Better the books if you want. She let out a long breath. Do whatever. Park looked at her for a moment longer. Bedroom, Eddie said. This is the kitchen. Of going back to school, careful to never let that news leak back to Elaine or her grandma or anyone. During one of these notions, she'd had to take the bus out to the community college in the suburbs. When she got out of her counseling appointment, her bus was just pulling away. She half-heartedly jogged after it for all of 10 seconds before just deciding to walk. She had nothing to do. As she meandered down Sandstone Avenue, she saw from a distance something that had caught her eye on the ride out. Asianism was. But what was more important was they had a big statue of a Tyrannosaurus Rex out front. If they thought a thunder lizard statue was enough to lure this girl in, then they were absolutely right. Roxy quickened her pace. But then she slowed again as she neared. She couldn't say for sure, but she thought she'd seen the T-Rex move. Tip forward and then back just a little, and then once more, a little further this time. As she approached, she saw this guy trying to pick the statue up. Oh, hi, he said when he looked up and saw her standing there. Hi. He made a big gesture of wiping sweat off his brow. So, he said, you just going to stand there or are you going to help? Roxy was pretty much super into Park Harple from then on. Exactly why, and even though Roxy rarely laughed, Park never stopped trying. She wanted to run in there to him, put her arms around his midsection from behind, hold on to him like he was flying them over the city, over the world. But she stayed put. Park came back out with a teapot and 2 cups on the rickety tray he wouldn't let her toss out. He set the tray down on a stack of National Geographic. He poured a cup of tea and added 1 sugar like she liked and handed it to her. He looked at her and blew on his tea. After a moment, she said, "A guy came by here today." "What guy?" "This guy my aunt sent up here to, I don't know, save me." "Elaine?" She nodded. He nodded back, setting his cup down in its saucer. "What did he say?" She shrugged. "Not much, really. He clearly didn't know what he was doing, just trying to get on my aunt's good side." "Friend of hers?" She shrugged again. "You could say that, I guess. I don't know." She nodded. He barked out a laugh, his face splitting into his usual good humor again. "Holy shit, wow, fucking Lupo Danish. Here, in my place, this is almost too much." "You know who he is?" "Oh, honey," he said, coming over to sit on the arm of her chair. "Ain't nobody don't know who Lupo Danish is." He smiled and moved her hood off her head, brushed some of her hair out of her eyes. "And it just so happens I'm going to be seeing him tomorrow night anyways. So you got nothing to worry about there." He played with his elbows. "I got to go into Fortlo tomorrow. Once I take out big bad Lupo Danish, the Banner boys are going to own Fortlo, just like in the old days." "What are you talking about? What old days?" Park shrugged. "You know, I don't know. Just sounded like something I should say." "But you can't just, I mean, I know that but this Lupo, he's..." Whoa, 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 whoa there, Tex. That sounds suspiciously like doubt I hear in your voice. You think I can't handle that guy?" "No, I didn't say that, but I don't think it's just... You've never had to handle him, a guy." Park smiled, dried his hands off on a spotty dish rag. "I know. Any grade?" 30. Also, when Park Harple was in high school, he and his friends had a particularly ball-breaking gym coach whose house they egged one Halloween. The coach's small son came outside to investigate when he heard giggles and splats. When Park saw him, he ran over to him and grabbed him by the thin plastic Captain America costume the little boy still wore. "Listen," he said through gritted teeth, "you say anything and I'll come back here and rape your mother." The boy didn't yet know what a rape was, but he did not speak a word again until the sudden end of his 6-week relationship with Patty Weist. It was the thick of January, and Park was wearing 3 coats. Eventually he was sweating. A homeless man he passed asked him for the price of a cup of coffee. The thought flashed through Park's head, fully formed, that he could easily give this man the jacket right off his back and be none the worse for it. He said, "Fuck off, you old hobo," and walked on. The man froze to death in his sleep that very night. The summer before his junior year, Park contracted herpes. He sat through enough health classes to recognize the signs that something was wrong, but he never went to a doctor, never got tested. Then, before engaging in a clear conscience, like any asshole, Park Harple never truly realized what an asshole he was. No, it wasn't a doors first opened, but the city was in danger of losing both its professional ice hockey and basketball teams, and Councilwoman Grimsrud made an impassioned speech on the steps of City Hall for the funding to build a new stadium. And though the main branch of the public library had become little more than a homeless shelter, the city voted unanimously for the stadium referendum. And it worked. The mining district officially became a hotspot destination for denizens and tourists alike. The new gardens ended up costing over $160 million, but they were state-of-the-art, complete with a Starbucks franchise and not 1, but 2 5-star seafood restaurants. Though Mickey Braddock saw more than a little bit of that 160 mil, the Gardens project did create hundreds of new jobs for the sagging local economy. Or, as Uncle Mickey once told me, let them eat bread. Lupo flew shoulder first into a lamppost on the new Gardens walkway. With a tong, the post bent in half, and Lupo's left arm became a sack of dead weight. Snow sticking to his face, Lupo stood, tore the post the rest of the way off with his right hand, backhanded it into Park's face as he leapt at it. Park bounced off the guardrail of the overpass, catching himself by his fingertips and dragging behind him like the living dead. Park said, "If you make a just hanging around joke, I will scream." He didn't point because he's holding onto the thing. Lupo paused for a moment, his breath ragged, and then began hammering his fist on Park's fingers. Man, I knew you were going to do that, Park said. He let go of the railing with one hand, grabbed Lupo by the shirt front, and pulled down, smashing Lupo's face into the cold metal. Lupo reeled back, slipped, and landed flat on his back. A drop of sweat fell from his nose. Oh no, buddy boy, he said with a giggle in his breath. You ain't going to pussy out on me now. Such language, these men. 32. Park had never been to the ocean before, never even to a lake or river. But when he was in high school, he'd gone to see Pulp Fiction in the theater and could bear stuff by the New Guard wrapped in shiny plastic, the Phantom Surfers, Man or Astroman, shadowy men on a shadowy planet. Park had always been fond of music, had always spent a good his and his alone. Until he turned 21, it was rare that he got to see any live surf music. Most aficionados of the stuff were well over drinking age, so the best Park could do was camp out in front of whatever venue Los Straitjackets or whoever were playing at and listen from out in the cold. But not long after Park finally saw 21 Summers did the longboards come to town. The longboards were fairly new to the scene, but Park was already a big fan, hunting down the few comp tracks they'd recorded through fanzine classifieds and whatnot. This was their first tour of the States, and Park was not going to miss it for the world. But these people, man, these fucking people. Boy that he was, Park had trouble adjusting to the mechanics of the bar scene. It's slowly dawning on him that these people were here mostly to drink and screw, that the music, the bands, they were largely incidental, generally just a very loud soundtrack for pickup artistry. After a few shows, though, it became easier to ignore this, to focus on why he was there, to hear the music he loved so much played live. Nothing else mattered. The opening bands had been okay enough, but pretty forgettable. As the longboards began setting up their equipment, though, Park stationed himself right at front and center of the small, rickety stage. The band even smiled and nodded at him, and his excitement was almost a physical thing. And the drums went boom, papa, boom, papa, boom. There were no effects beyond the reverb on the guitars, and the drummer played without a hi-hat even. There was no real stage show, no decorations, no banners, no endless summer playing on a loop behind the band. Just good traditional surf. Just three dudes and their instruments. Slowly but steadily, the crowd began to file into the room, pushing up against Park so that his knees were driven to the lip of the stage. At first, Park was fine. He barely noticed. And then when he did notice, it felt good. He felt as though he were among friends he hadn't met, friends who loved and revered this music as much as he did. And then the Ruskies started up. They'd been there all night, but aside from their dopey accents, they'd been indistinguishable to Park from all the other drunken jerks here. Park hadn't touched a drop himself all night, wanting to indulge in the music. Dressed in American costumes, baggy jeans, big sneakers with loose laces. One of them had a bright orange beanie pulled down almost over his eyes, and another one wore a Lakers jersey. They'd been shoving shots and beers at the band pretty much since they took the stage, and the guys in the band politely accepted, though Park noticed the drummer just letting the full glasses pile up behind his kit. As the set went on, the Ruskies' dancing became even more ridiculously white, all elbows and thighs, nearly falling over more often than not. If Park wanted a mosh pit, he'd have gone to fucking Lollapalooza. Sorry, I smudged my glasses and now I can't see as well. All right. You don't sing, man, one of them said between songs, and for a moment, Park thought he was talking to him. He wheeled around, a snarl on his lips. But then he saw that the guy was addressing the guitarist. The Ruskie's eyes were red-rimmed beneath his stupid hat. You give me mic, I sing, the Ruskie said, and downed his drink. I sing in Russian. The guitarist, Park was reluctant to admit, was very handsome. Olive skin, fine hair, peach fuzz on his chin. And when he frowned slightly at this odd request, Park felt his heart break a little bit. This guy had come all the way from Spain, had brought his picking skills here to the sailor's delight, to indeed delight the true surf connoisseur. And here this dipshit was throwing a monkey wrench into the whole thing. The guitarist looked over at the bass player, and even in his vodka fog, the Ruskie twigged that the bass player was the one with a grasp on English. Before he could be brought up to speed at all, the Ruskie said, I sing in Russian. I like you guys, so I sing for you. In Russian, I sing for you. I sing in Russian. What in the holy hell? Park couldn't believe what he was hearing. It all came to him in a flash, much more quickly than it did to the band. This fucking asshole actually thought there were supposed to be lyrics, that this music was not perfect. All God's green earth was all this bullshit. Is this people? Is this what people do? No vocals, man, the bass player said eventually. No mic. There was, in fact, a mic, but the bass player moved it aside after the first song. But I singing. And then he was drowned out as the drummer clicked off the next song. The band launched into their version of Knight Rider. There was a minute there where Park just enjoyed what he was hearing, a loud, live version of a song that he thought was always better off without a sax solo, and he felt it wash over him, tingles at the ends of his arm hair. And then he made the mistake of looking over at the Ruskies. He was doing it in Russian. He was attempting to improve upon the song, attempting to exert his will over the reality that traditional surf music had no vocal accompaniment. He had the brass balls to make that attempt. Not tonight. Park punched him in the side of the face. The Rusky happened to turn into his fist at the perfect moment, and his cheekbone shattered like a honeycomb. The bottom of the Rusky's left eyeball, so he hit him on this side. The bottom of the Rusky's left eyeball was bright pink, naked for a moment before blood oozed from the face. Park hit him again. The Rusky's jaw dangled from his head like a meaty wishbone. The song faded, and no one, not even the Rusky himself, seemed to notice anything amiss. Park hit him. I guess this was happening to someone else. The Rusky brought his hand to his face. The tips of his fingers sank into raw flesh. The scream that rose from him was like a siren, gaining in volume, then receding, then gaining yet again. Park pushed him away just to get the keening out of his ears. The entire crowd froze. The amps on stage hissed. The Rusky wailed, but all eyes were on Park. The longboard squinted against the stage lights. Park looked around, completely aware, but confused all the same. What on earth? Where was the music? Park left. He turned. 33. Lupo? Lupo. Lupo. His thigh was simultaneously cold and hot, as though it had the flu with heat. Sorry. His face felt like it was wearing several other heavier faces on top of it. His eyes felt like they'd been soaking in chlorine. His nostrils felt like they were stuffed with dead earthworms. In his mind's eye, his shoulder was being torn, flesh from bone, like a close-up of hands tearing apart fried chicken on a TV commercial. Two hands pulling his arm from its socket under a bright, kicky light playing on a loop in his head. He forced his eyes open. He was 50 feet above the snow-white earth. The New Gardens was a square building, not the usual arena shape you often saw in other cities and other towns. Excuse me. The roof was still rounded, a gentle arch over the athletics and concerts therein, but the sides of the building were sheer, flat, and also icy this time of year. Park Harple jabbed his fingers into the building, crimping his way up as though it was a north face. Lupo was draped over one of his shoulders. And this close up to him, Lupo could smell the stink of blood and sweat on him, but also another smell, one that took him a moment to place. It was a cool smell, one that reminded Lupo a little bit of a rainy day. Graveyard dirt. That's what Park Harple smelled like, graveyard dirt. Lupo allowed his eyes to shut. 34. Lupo stared up at the ceiling. Elaine's breath warmed his armpit. Elaine's bedroom was a girl's bedroom. No, not that. A woman's bedroom. The walls were painted a softer egg white color. There was a desk with a laptop and some minor clutter and a single bookshelf with a complete set of the Little House on the Prairie books and a snow globe from the film Fargo. Her queen-size bed had a fluffy white bedspread on it with a thick black stripe across the middle, and the pillows had a matching inverse pattern. The bed had been nicely made earlier before Elaine had thrown him on it and had her way with him, had their way with each other. An old teddy bear and blankets were making his feet sweat. He slid one foot out into the open air, felt it cool. Elaine snuffled. She said. Didn't say nothing, Lupo whispered. She said, and then was still again. He could feel her drool on his skin. Lupo said, I slit the sheet I slit, and on the slitted sheet I sit. He paused for a moment and waited. She did not stir, just her deep breathing, just her warm spittle. He said, I've never done anything just because I was the place. It's like Hawaii, people say, but closer and cheaper. And it struck me as weird, that comparison. Like Hawaii. People all around the world dream of going to Hawaii, where the water is always warm and the girls all wear coconut bras. But it costs a fortune to get there, to stay there, hell, to live there. And all this time, there's a smaller version of it that you can practically swim to. Nobody seems to notice or care. It's not far away enough, so it's not good enough or something. You can go snorkeling all day. Lover's Cove, I think they call it, point. So it's got water on 3 sides, a big round building, a 1-screen movie theater. You can go swimming all day and then go to the movies. Slept. Sorry. He's being vulnerable. 35. By the time they reached the and threw him flat on his back onto the gently sloping steel. Whew, Park said. You gotta be. But his breath was coming too quickly now, too desperately, to where his teeth hurt from the exertion of it. He held himself there for another minute or so, letting a wave of dizziness pass over him and then away, and began to push himself up. The veins in his biceps bulged, and his hands began to slip from the blood seeping steadily from his fingernails after his climb. But he managed to push and hold himself up long enough to get one foot up onto the roof. Lupo kicked him in the face with the soles of both shoes. Park's arms pinwheeled by the hair. Not that easy, Lupo said. He threw Park onto the roof, and Park bounced across the surface like a skipped stone. Most of the snow had slid down into the gutters, and the frozen steel vibrated beneath Lupo's feet. He took a moment to lean on the roof door and took one breath, two. And then he reached up and broke off an antenna. Park skidded to a stop after about 50 feet and sat up, gave his head a violent shake. He focused his eyes just as Lupo Danish stomped into view. "Oh, hey," he said, before Lupo whipped him in the face with the antenna. The thin steel was 15 feet long, wide at the bottom, kind of like a ball bat, and hit him again and then again, whipping him across the face before Park could get another word in. After 7 or 8 times, the antenna broke again. Park struggled to his feet, blood pouring from the slashes in his face, spotting the roof. Lupo tossed the end of the antenna aside. Park said, "You all done with your little hissy fit? You ready to quit playing around and do this?" "Yes," Lupo said. "I'm ready to do this." Park smiled. "Then let's fucking do this, Chief." Park threw a punch, his fist cleaving through the icy air up here. Lupo caught it in one hand, a meaty slap of flesh upon flesh. He crushed Park's hand. The bones in his fingers popped like bubble wrap. There was a moment where Park just stared at him, and Lupo stared back before letting go. Park threw back his head and howled. His breath came in great puffs of steam from his throat like an engine. Lupo punched him in the throat once his ears couldn't take it anymore. Park doubled over, his larynx trying to unfold itself. But when Lupo took a step forward, Park backhanded him, sending Lupo flying. Lupo landed on his back again. Before he could bounce even once, Park was on top of him, tears running down his face. The roof rumbled like thunder beneath them. Park's eyes bulged in their sockets and rolled like a rabid possum's as he beat Lupo in the face with his one good fist and his other swollen claw. Lupo felt his nose break in at least 2 places before he reached up and raked Park's eyes with his fingers. Park didn't even have a scream left in him anymore, but he stopped long enough for Lupo to give him a knee in the balls. What are these guys and their balls? Sorry, I smudged my glasses again. I've only been wearing them since I was 16. Why would I be good at it? Lupo was looking at him. They charged. Lupo scooped Park up and slammed him to the roof, and it shuddered beneath them like a weeping widow. Park kicked cheek. Lupo grabbed him by the hair and yanked, a piece of his face coming loose in Park's jaws. Park spat it at him. Oh boy, they're not messing around. Lupo punched him in the breastbone. They did that for a few minutes, punching each other while on their knees, like midgets wrestling, until Park boxed Lupo's ears. Park rolled to his right, but couldn't make his shoulder lift more than an inch or two. He tried again, and once more, grunting. He finally succeeded, only to land on his face. He laid his hand flat on the roof, breathing the cold steel into his lungs, and pushed himself up. Lupo felt blood filling his throat and spat it out at the sky like a whale. He's laying on his back. the warm droplets splashing back onto his face. He got his elbows under him and pushed up, his head sagging backwards like it was made of concrete. He grabbed his own pant legs and pulled them up to get his feet flat on the roof. They both stood weaving, their shoulders rising and falling with each breath. They each separately felt the push to charge again, their heels lifting a bit unconsciously forward. Lupo did the same, and then the roof caved in. 36. Lupo awakes in a strange bedroom, though he doesn't know exactly why. He gets up and steps out into the living room. There are orange curtains on the windows and houseplants in almost every corner. He crosses to the swinging door at the far corner. He crosses to the swinging door at the far corner, but trips over the couch, landing on his face. The carpet smells like cigarette butts and duct tape. He rises slowly. It is a nice day outside, and the sun streaming through the window is almost deafening. Lupo says, "Melissa?" Melissa turns and looks at him. She has egg salad all over her mouth and her chin. She says, "I can't get the sandwich to cooperate." She looks like she's about to cry. Lupo walks over and sees that the bowl she's using is actually full to the brim with shit. Shit is piled on the bread on her plate. She has shit all over her mouth and her chin. She says, "I don't know what to do." Lupo goes back out into the living room to find Elaine, who now has long blonde hair collar around his neck. He says, "No, I can't." "You have to," Elaine says with a smile. But still smiling, Elaine yells, "Heel! Heel!" And there stands Roxy, dressed in dirty coveralls and nothing else. She has one fist raised, about to knock, and her eyes widen at the sight of him. He shoves her aside and runs, hears her crash to the ground with an "oh!" He runs down the steps and almost bowls over a middle-aged man with silver hair. "Whoa, whoa, whoa, buddy," the silver-haired man says. "Take it easy." He wears jeans and a blue t-shirt with a sports jacket. Jeans and a blue t-shirt. He holds a script in one hand. Lupo says, "Hey, I know you. You're character actor Richard Klein." Richard Klein smiles at him and shakes his hand warmly. "Oh, always nice to meet a fan. Listen, buddy, I'm supposed to be reading for this part, but I'm a little lost. Do you think you could point me in the right direction?" Lupo says, I don't... A part? "Yeah, just a supporting role, but hey, pays the bills." Richard Klein looks around at the apartment building, gazes out into the street. "This all looks very familiar, but I couldn't be more lost right about now." Lupo scratches his head, kind of shrugs and says, "You can try upstairs? I think they might want you upstairs." "Hey, thanks, buddy." "Oh, look at that," Richard Klein says. "It's raining." Water begins running down the stairs as though a dam had burst. "Excuse me, please," Lupo says, and knocks on the door of the nearest apartment. He waits. There's no answer, so he knocks again. His feet are getting wet now, his bare feet, so he begins banging on the door. He goes to the window and peers in. The apartment is empty. He wears a puce jumpsuit with the sleeves torn off and a kerchief around his neck. He holds Richard Klein in front of him with a knife to the man's throat. "Lupo," Richard Klein says. "It's Lupo, right?" Lupo thinks for a moment, then nods. "Lupo," Richard Klein says. "You gotta help me. This guy's crazy. No offense, buddy." "None taken," Park says, and he slits Richard Klein's throat. Richard Klein dies quickly, his last breath gurgling out of him like a broken. He tosses it at Lupo's feet. The fish also has a kerchief tied around it, just below its head. It flops on the ground violently for a few minutes, eventually settling down, gasping at the thick air around it. Its eye looks up at Lupo. "Be careful," it says, and the voice sounds familiar, so familiar that Lupo can taste it. "Be careful how you wish." Lupo stumbled into Elaine's bathroom. The light stung his eyes, and he quickly closed the door to keep from waking her. He turned the faucet on and slapped some water onto his face. He stared at his reflection in the mirror. His water ran down the drain. "Fuck you," Lupo said. "Whatever you say, Chief." Behind him, Elaine pushed the door open, rubbing her eyes. "Lupo? Who are you talking to?" He whirled on her, slamming the faucet off, and she jumped back a little, covering her nakedness with her hands. Her hair stuck up from the back of her head. "Nobody," Lupo said. "Whew, getting close. Still in my coma, but even further down. It might even have been 6 weeks, maybe 8, way down at the bottom of everything inside of me. But then I heard the roof cave in." It's hard to describe really, but picture it like this. You're in a sewer, a frozen sewer. It's dark, but it smells so bad down here, even through the ice, that you can see, I guess, where everything is. You go and try the door, even though you know it won't open. So you begin ramming your shoulder into it again and again. At first, you're just hurting your shoulder, but eventually you feel the door begin to give, the jam begins to squeak, and then finally it opens. But it still smells so bad, you're not even sure at first. In the dream, Lupo is trying to sleep, but Mr. Bover and Uncle Mickey melts into the floor like a snowman in July. Lupo is floating over the earth, its surface cragged, rocky, barren, destitute. He floats unsurely, as though he'll plummet from the sky at any moment. He lands gently on a plateau and chats with Johnny Mulvihill. Johnny's depressed, but Lupo is very happy to see him. In the dream, Lupo is being dragged underwater. He kicks and struggles, pushing water behind himself with hands like shovels, but he can go nowhere. The water is salty in his mouth, and he feels someone clinging to his ankle. He looks down, but there is no one there. He begins crying, and the salt of his tears is hot and burns his eyes. He is not in the ocean, though. He's in a swimming pool in some suburban backyard, the sun shining, a cool breeze blowing. A flock of birds flies over, high above, oblivious. Lupo is drowning in the tears of Johnny Mulvihill. In the dream, Lupo is at the bus stop on Jordan Road. Matt Washington and his goons are stomping down the street towards them, each one of them 40 feet tall. Matt grins the sight of Lupo, and his lips pulling back over his crooked teeth makes a noise like 100 windshields being smeared by 100 dirty diapers. He throws back his head and lets out a roar like Godzilla, then crushes Carrie French's house beneath one massive Reebok pump. Lupo can't even cry anymore. Lupo is having sex with his own mother, and he can't even cry anymore. Lupo and Georgie Boy fly through the night. There is still some pink in the sky, far to the west, but the anger rolls off of him like heat. He says, "Why, Georgie Boy?" Georgie Boy laughs and says, "Who cares, Lupo Danish?" Far below them, a Tyrannosaurus Rex grabs a great white shark by its tail with its teeth. It flips the mighty fish into the air and opens its mouth, a boxy, stiff-legged robot with cathode tube eyes. The T-Rex turns, and far above, Lupo and Georgie can hear it go, "Huh?" The robot extends one arm, its grappling hook hand folding in on itself in a series of bleeps and blorps. The hand begins to rebuild itself, and the T-Rex watches closely, sniffing at it from a distance. The hand becomes a saw blade, and with a faint click, it begins whirring until the noise is almost deafening. An exclamation point appears above the T-Rex's head. The robot slices the massive lizard in half the long way. Its right side falls to the ground, its left side follows suit a moment later. Lupo looks at Georgie. Georgie looks at Lupo. Man, that was pretty cool, huh? I can see it. I can see it all, and it's all very pretty. It's very beautiful indeed. So I decided to get out of bed and go have a look for myself. 38. The roof caved in, and Lupo slid on his feet into the yawning blackness beneath him. He laughed. It was the first time he had laughed in a long time, but the rush of his guts up into his throat as he slid down and off the crumpling steel, as the wind roared around his ears, it was just too much. He just had to laugh. He tumbled head first, and the only light was the weak sky spilling in from the hole in the roof. Lupo braced for impact, but it didn't come, so he relaxed. And then he tensed again, but impact continued to elude him, so he relaxed again. Tensed, relaxed. He was just about to tense up again and listened to the tinkle and tiny crashes that hailed this end of tonight's violence. A chunk of the splintered floor scratched at his face, and the sludgy ice beneath him seemed to shudder. A part of Lupo began trying to will visions before his eyes. He tried to see Melissa sitting up suddenly in bed, unexplainable sobs clutching her chest. He tried to see his parents. He tried to see me and him as kids. He tried to see our kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Medina, and her stern but loving face. Nothing. The best he could do was a soft, muted image of Elaine standing on a train platform. He saw her from the back. She was wearing an old-fashioned hoop dress and a hat pinned to her hair. There was the faint sound of a train whistle, and she looked to her left. Lupo said, "Well, I guess that's good enough." And then he died. 39. I get up out of bed, the blankets slumping to the floor in a pile. The mattress holds a very distinct print of me, as though it were some oversized preschool Christmas ornament. As I pass by, the TV turns on and begins playing Twilight Zone reruns at an incredible clip. But I've seen all of those already, so I just leave the room. The door swings open and slams into the hallway wall much more loudly than I meant it to. Lights begin to turn on in the apartment and in the building and on the block, and whoa, gotta get down the hallway before I do anything. As I get to the top of the stairs, my Uncle Mickey's bedroom door opens. Uncle Mickey's latest girlfriend, whose name I don't know, but then I do know, Sheila O'Hara. Twice divorced, 37 years old, but tells people she's 29. Mascara runs down her cheeks, and we're both surprised at how sad she is. She looks up and sees me, and we're both surprised again. She says, "Your uncle is dead, George." She doesn't say it, but I can hear it all the same. I don't really care, but I'm still a little touched that Sheila is here. She seems nice. Down the stairs I go and out into the hall. The elevator's down to my left, but I figure I can take the express and turn to my right. I push myself towards the window at the end of the hall, and the glass bulges outward the closer I get until it finally explodes, raining glass into the alleyway below. It's okay, though. There's nobody down there. Once outside, I realize my naked ass is hanging out. It's an unpleasant sight for anyone, certainly, but not much I can do about it just this minute. There's another feeling, a weird feeling that is familiar, but I can't quite place it until I realize I'm fucking freezing out here. But as soon as I think that, a glow of warmth settles over me, over my near naked body, and I think, I can get used to this. I rise up out of the alley, one story till I'm over the roof, and a chorus of car alarms from the street floats up to me. I close my eyes a bit and quiet them, assign a little part of my brain to be in charge of those. So obnoxious, those things. Above me, the night sky is all but clear, a few clouds left over from all the snow today. As I drift over the roofs, drift over the buildings, snow will rise a little and hover, like those old toy faces you could give a metal shaving beard with a magnet. In my wake, the trembling snow is very pretty in the starlight. Part of my brain stays with that sight, just so I have something pretty to look at later. Have a feeling I'm going to need it. Riverview is very quiet at night. Upper middle class families all cozy in their beds, worrying about nothing more than their stupid empty lives. I want to kiss them all, but then again, I don't. This is the first time I've been outside in decades, and it's almost too much. Plenty of time for all that later, Georgie boy. I rise up a little higher, just high enough so the whole city is below me. Trying to get my bearings, I feel another strangely familiar sensation. Fort Low City circles beneath me. The stars circle above me. Everything circles around me, and a strangely familiar headache begins to throb right behind my eyes. It's my eyes, my rolling, useless eyes. Haven't felt them in weeks, months. I'm on my way now, but not quite there yet. Hey ho, let's go. I push myself southwest over the freeway, over Socrates Park, where they had the curvy slides Lupo and I used to enjoy so much, their hot metal seeping through our shorts all summer long. Past the park and into the city proper, where from up here you can almost see the property values dip, the streetlights fizzing out and then back on if I squeeze a part of my brain just right. Drug dealers and other scumbags scurry away from the light, and their footfalls from up here thunder in my ears like ants on cotton. Over downtown proper, I look down on the skyline. There's Fort Low Square, and I can see the top of Seth Fortlow's head. The Purvis National Building, the Capcheck Towers, they look like cardboard models. The Skylark Building looks impossible from this height. I mean, how has it not toppled over by now, crushed its own lower levels beneath itself? As I reach the mining district, I can see the scar of destruction newly opened across its face, people crying, people whimpering and murmuring. I clench my fists and can almost hear the dust pop off the joints in my hand. But I send a wave down into the mining district, digging deep into everyone, so deep that I have to pause for a moment. I'm too late anyway, so I pause for a moment. The people are still whimpering, still sobbing, but then they feel it, the warmth. And at first they're scared again, but then they all internally shrug and just allow it. A young woman forced to walk home after her bus is destroyed begins to relax, realizes that she escaped a terrible fate and will very likely do so again. A fat, balding cop dries his eyes, tells himself that his young partner did not much enjoy this life and will almost certainly be happier in the new one. One guy, a youngish guy who feels lonely a lot of the time, he laughs a little and says out loud to his empty bedroom, "Hey, fuck it." I push myself along, following this nature trail to hell until I reach the bucket. 40. Park Harple hung by one hand, his good hand, and his, like I said, this one, and his legs swung gently beneath him, circling slower and slower in the yawning blackness beneath him until they came to rest. His crushed hand throbbed at the end of his wrist, and Park thought he was just going to have to cut it off altogether, but consoled himself with the promise of getting himself a really cool hook. Maybe one of those prosthetic hands that has knives in the fingers. That's a thing, right? The trembling in the pit of his stomach was foreign to him, and if he wasn't such an asshole, he would have been able to admit to himself that he was afraid now. There was no noise coming from below except the tinkle and ding of roof debris settling to the floor of the new gardens. It was all over. Lupo Danish was not coming back up out of that. And though Park was elated that he had won, that he had met his enemy, and it was some other dude out of whom he beat the shit, Park Harple was still a little bit afraid. Now what? But Park hung there by his one good hand, and the sweat on his body began to chill and then to freeze in the open night air, the blood on his face and chest blackening, and that fear was pushed aside and replaced with all that fear was pushed aside, his grip loosening. When he went to inhale, to take a large breath, to laugh some more, the motion caused his fingers, already cut nearly halfway through by the torn steel, to be sliced clean off. The blackness beneath yawned wider to swallow him, and Park watched the stubs of his fingers fall alongside of him. "Uh-oh," he said. "No more pities." 41. The Wonderful Story of George Malloy. Once upon a time, there was a kid so bored that his mind transcended this plane of existence and afforded him a high degree control over this reality as we know it. Yet he was still so dumb and useless that he couldn't save his Park Harple's life. So even though it doesn't matter anymore, I go ahead and do it anyways. Park hangs there in midair, and the sight of me burns his retinas out completely. The rods and cones in his eyeballs just painted white and useless. I tone it down a bit, not having realized how bright the sight of me is. My head lolls to the left as I turn on all the lights in the new gardens. The lights roll on from one end of the stadium to the other. The scoreboard flickers to life, the giant TV screens on each of the scoreboard flickers to life, the giant TV screens on Lupo's body. Park looks around, but he can't move his head, can't see anything but me. I look through his eyes. I hack, and head brushes the ceiling of the new gardens, and he is bright like a dying star, filling Park's vision. His hospital gown flaps slowly in the night breeze. Park chuckles. "Hey, Georgie boy, right?" he says. "Hey, how's it going?" My fingers, hanging near my thighs, curl a bit as I reach out and take Park by either side of the head. Mentally. Park frowns as he feels it, the slight pressure. I let him hang there in midair for another moment or two before dropping him. His body lands in the floor-level seats, tumbling its way down a few rows before landing face down at the bottom row, his arm dangling from the stands. I lower myself down into the arena, down to my friend Lupo Danish. He rests in the crater he's made in the floor like a meteor landing. The sharp scent of broken wood reaches my nostrils, the floor of the basketball court ripped open around him. The ice he rests on steams a little from the warmth of his corpse. His body seems to be shrinking in on itself, as though he were decomposing already, which I suppose he is. His arms are splayed out, one elbow bent unnaturally so that his forearm is backwards above his head. His long legs rest up on the wood of the basketball court, one shoe untied and halfway off his foot. His face looks up at the ceiling, his eyes half-lidded, as though he's being told a very boring story. I lower myself down and hang there. I say, "Hey, buddy," but it comes out as "Nyeh," so I just shut up. I try to look at them with my eyes, but they will still not work. I crook my neck, so I start to get a little angry. I came all this way and now I can't even look at him. But even though it would have been nice to see him again, you can't have everything, I guess. So, just let him get his sleep, Georgie boy. The end. Jimmy Calloway is So that's the end of our boy, a little adventure there, huh? Little superhero team is not getting off to a great start. All right, so that's the end of that. Thanks for stopping by. I'm assuming the one person watching right now is my son. So I think it's probably time for you to either go to bed or play video games for 6 hours. Who cares? The world's ending. If anyone else is watching this, they can join us on Wednesday at 6 Pacific. And we're going to read The Shadow over Innsmouth by H.P. Lovecraft, which I mentioned at the top. And it will be fun. This is fun. I like to read. I certainly enjoy the sound of my own voice, apparently. Yeah, that's it. All right. Good night. And may God bless.